deliberately blaspheming the name of our Lord, you should expect to have your tongue cut out, or worse, because that's the
What? Why? That's disgusting. What's wrong with you?
thing.
There's a lot of people in the United States that will refer to Catholics. They'll be like, I'd rather be a Satanist than a Catholic. I'd rather, like, it's the worst religion, like this sort of stuff where it's like, it's not Christian, it's not really Christian. You are just as much a member of the church as everyone else. Does it make sense? Like, does it make sense? Are we reading the Bible correctly in relation to how we should love you in relation to your personal experiences? Do you think it's a reasonable thing to ask someone to live a life of celibacy or to live a life in which they have to constantly deny their sexual proclivities to the point in which it can cause genuine psychological issues and engage in forms of self-deprecation? Do you think this is reasonable? Do you think this is loving? Like, this is what we need to ask ourselves here, and I don't think it is. Did he just do like a little hat tip towards eugenics whilst saying, yeah, that's wrong, so we should be anti-immigration? Q&A. Milo's book, Blasphemy Law.
All right, so in like a potential Christian nationalist or like theocratic U.S., what would kind of the government policy on smoking indoors be? Is that permitted?
There's something odd about smoking. Smoking's the only thing that's bad for you that the government doesn't promote.
See, that's kind of what I think.
Yeah, there's something up with that. I feel like maybe on the low, smoking is really good for you, and they just don't want us to know, and cancer comes from like the TV or something, because there's no
something, yeah.
There's something, whatever, No, it's bad vibes or the devils or something, but there's something weird about the fact that smoking's the only thing that kills you that the government doesn't subsidize and encourage.
See, yeah, I've always found that to be kind of questionable.
I think smoking is extremely based, and I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, certainly in my faith tradition, the early church fathers were very enthusiastic about alcohol, in moderation, of course, although moderation had a slightly different meaning in the 1200s. So I think they would be lighting up the Marlboro right next to you.
All right, well, awesome.
I don't think so. I really, really do not think so.
Destin, do you have any sort of opinion on that, or?
I kind of like smoking being banned from indoors, I want to be honest.
Fair
somebody
enough.
that is
I didn't live it. So.
As somebody that's 34, the older people in here will remember for restaurants we had no smoking sections. They definitely didn't work. I don't mind people smoking.
I remember no smoking sections. I remember that as a kid, like the smoking and no smoking, and you just sort of like the smoke would just drift over, so there was no real point.
I guess like outside if they want to smoke, but
I don't know what's
having
going on.
to share spaces with just disgusting cigarette smoke, like constantly wafting through the air, especially if you've got kids around and stuff, I think it's really disgusting. So I'm glad it's gone from inside.
You sort of get used to it, though. I mean, the only reason to visit Germany after 1945, really, is the fact that you can smoke while you're having a coffee.
There's a lot of drugs you can get used to, but I don't know if you're a good argument in favor of that.
I'm not saying that there's, there are certain things that you can't necessarily argue from first principles convincingly, but nonetheless seem to work better, like monarchy and smoking.
All right, well, fair enough. Thank you, guys.
They don't, though. Cringe.
Hi,
I clawed one person back, you see.
I'm so glad someone brought up smoking, because I really needed a Marlboro Red coming in here, and I was like, God, okay.
It's hardcore. I'm a Newport Lights guy.
Okay, right.
Smoke for the man you want, as
from
was.
John, maybe. But I wanted to ask you, Milo. It's a question on speech, and the first one was, what?
So it's like, can you smoke the gay away? That's the real question.
Happened to make America hate again? I was looking forward to that book. I was telling all my friends and family about it, and then it didn't come out.
I kept getting employed by people, but I've written most of it, and I think it's become actually more urgent than ever. There's a particular understanding of hate, which I think the left fails to make this distinction, probably on purpose a lot of the time. You'll hear Christians sometimes say, hate the sin and love the sinner. What they mean by that is that people are what they do. People are their conscious choices, right? So we shouldn't hate people because they were born a particular ethnicity or gender or whatever, obviously, unless they're French. But what we should instead do is judge them by what they choose to do, right? So people are their actions. And psychology is now catching up with religion. It's, there's no gay men on forms anymore. It's men who have sex with men. So psychology is kind of catching up with this idea that we are what we choose to do. We can...
I think that's like... There's a truth and a falsity to that position, and I think you can see that in the work of Slavoj Žižek when he talks about psychoanalysis, where it's we don't choose who we'll fall in love with. We don't choose who we're attracted to in a way that it's like, and the same thing with gender. We can't just choose what gender, but like if I think about it long enough, I can decide to be a woman, or I can decide I want to be a man. It almost chooses us. And that doesn't mean that it's not a choice at the foundational level, but it means that the choices that have led to that conclusion, really, or the structure of that individual, are really unconscious at the point in which, when we were, infants, we've chosen to acclimate certain structures into ourselves, or reject certain structures into ourselves in relation to social dynamics, and internalize certain events in such a way as to construct an individual who is, has a proclivity for one thing or the other. And that's what it means to be like straight, gay, bisexual, blah, blah, blah. And often those labels are very, very inadequate, right? Like they don't really explain and encompass the variety of human sexuality, right? But it's not something that we're just sort of cognitively like, oh yes, I am going to be gay, right? And that I will only find a fulfilling sexual relationship with the member of the same sex, right? I don't think anyone would have ever done that, given the situations that were placed in prior to having civil rights, right? Like no one would have done that. So the when we look at it, it's ridiculous. And I think that only someone who truly hates themselves would make it such a binary, you choose it or you don't. It's clearly not like that. Like maybe sleeping with men, fair enough, but choosing to be attracted to men? Like, did they choose that? I don't think so.
Hate what people do, the choices they make, and the evil that they perpetuate, without hating...
At least not cognitively, I should say.
...them as human beings, as children of God. And I think it's become more urgent than ever that we, I think, rehabilitate hate. And
such irony there, isn't it? Like, considering how fucking much of a dick he's been.
I definitely have been encouraged to get that bloody project finished because I think it's more urgently needed than ever. We ought to be able to look at something abhorrent and say, I hate it. I hate it powerfully. I hate it passionately. I hate it with every fiber of my being, and I'll fight it, and I'll stop it, and I'll die for it. I'll die to get rid of it. The kind of lifestyle he leads, is the sort of thing that I think it's okay to hate. It's a conscious choice that hurts everyone, that leaves lives ruined, you can see the results. That I think it's okay to hate, although I am commanded to love him as, a fellow man, as a Christian, which, I'm working on.
That brought me to the substance of what I wanted to ask you.
Oh, just on a real quick thing, because you didn't really answer that question. If you want to know when his next book is coming out, you should ask the guy that actually writes them.
Oh, fuck. That was a good one as well, right?
I have to believe Milo writes them. I'm a big fan, and they're all fabulous. Anyway.
I think, given that I write about 10,000 words a week on Telegram, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that I might throw a book together once every 2.5 years, which is roughly when I get around to doing them. But you tried.
And it's a great Telegram, almost better than Tucker. Okay, it is better than Tucker. But what I wanted to get to is with... That's just another
Milo, right? Like, we are watching another, like, gay conservative man, right? Like, right now, it's like... He's like, I love Milo.
With blasphemy,
yeah.
Are blasphemy laws the proper way to have a First Amendment, but also keep it from corrupting itself?
Yes, I think you need a deterrent to remind people what it is that keeps everything held together.
what is a blasphemy law? Like, I want to know what they mean by that and who decides what's blasphemous and what's not. Like, what is sacrosanct and what isn't?
And I think if somebody goes out repeatedly...
We already have, like, the United States already has laws that limit freedom of speech, like, to certain, like, prevent certain ethical abuses of such power. But one of the biggest issues is how far this should go, and that's always been the debate. That's just adding to the problem. It's fuel to the fire.
Deliberately blaspheming the name of our Lord, you should expect to have your tongue cut out, or worse, because that's the
What? Why? That's disgusting. What's wrong with you?
thing that keeps everything together. In just the way
What is wrong with you?
that Americans get very touchy when flags, graze the floor and stuff like that. It's perfectly reasonable anxiety.
Okay, right. No, it's not perfectly reasonable neurotics, but no one's calling for people to be fucking murdered.
To have, because the flag is a sort of, crap proxy for the things that really matter. I think it's perfectly reasonable to have those things sacrosanct, and America does. It just picks...
Jesus Christ Superstar has to be allowed. He's far too gay to not be okay with that.
Stupid shit instead of the right things.
Thank you.
Hello. So Milo, you have identified yourself as an ex-gay, and you have also advocated for conversion therapy and making it to...
Tragic as fuck, right? Please, no one, right? If God but does not hate you because you like the same sex, I promise you that God does not hate you. Do not go into those fucking torture groups. Like, that it's not right. It doesn't do you any good. It does far more harm than the possibility of you becoming straight. And you're not going to become straight, right? You're talking about deconstructing someone's mind. Like, first, I'm not saying that they don't work in the sense that conceptually they could not work, because I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that there is the possibility that they could work. But in working, it is a moral tragedy. It's travesty. It's awful. It should not happen. It is gruesome and vile that you talk about, like, rewriting someone's mind, essentially to be in such a way as to conform to a sort of doctrinal belief, which really I think is formed from a really poor reading of natural law. So, like, don't do it. Read some philosophy, learn more about natural law, and tell them why it's not really wrong that you're gay. And instead promote the fact that, what we should be focused on is less about who you're having sex with and more about how you're engaging with others in love. Like, that's really what we should be focusing on, rather than, let's say, like, your sexual proclivities. Like, that's, like, I think obvious.
Where it is more, I guess, acceptable to the media, or presenting a more positive light of conversion?
I don't much care if journalists like it or not. I just want to save souls, but go on.
Yeah. So I just wanted to know how you planned, like, on making it to be seen as, like, more positive in the media, just because a lot of studies have shown that conversion therapy is traumatic for...
No, they haven't.
I mean, let's be honest, it is incredibly traumatic. Like, it is a form of psychological deconstruction. Like, it has to be traumatic. It wouldn't be capable of doing what it says it is capable of doing if it wasn't traumatic.
If you recall, even the most left-wing, that ridiculous. I mean, okay, the strongest argument you have.
Yeah, just
is
lie.
That,
good response. Yeah, absolutely.
Biden, the nuclear tranny. The one whose job was dealing with spent rods, who used to steal luggage from there was that lovely, was it a Nairobi woman? What was she? A fashion designer. That tranny your first clue was he's wearing women's clothes. Maybe not somebody you want around nuclear material.
What? Why would someone being like what? Why would someone being trans have anything to do with whether they should work with nuclear material? I don't get it.
Your strongest argument is he went through conversion therapy, but of course on film he said it worked and he liked it. So the testimony is a bit unreliable in this area, and I think most of the reason for that is that it doesn't...
Isn't there like evidence that they've beaten people with Bibles and shit, and like reenacted sexual abuse and stuff like that? And then they try to create like negative, like, and there was like gay conversion therapists who like came out and were like, I'm gay.
doesn't work all
And it's actually just been like homosexual homophobia and stuff.
the time. And the majority of...
no one hates the gays like the gays, man. I just want to say that, right? No one is capable... Every group hates themselves way more than any other group. Like, it's just the way it works, isn't it? Like, you've got Muslims blowing up Muslims, you've got Christians killing each other, you've got like white people and black people shooting white people and black people exclusively, you've got the gays making anti-gay camps. Like, it's just self-loathing, man. Go to therapy. You don't need to hurt anyone else.
It doesn't work most of the time, actually. The best that most people can hope for is celibacy. And I think that disappointment is what drives a lot of the negative testimony afterwards. I think that it works in conversion therapy's favor that it's hated. If you find it ridiculous for me to say that, that it's a good thing that works, there isn't a person in this room who can honestly say, the press treated Donald Trump totally fairly in 2016. Even if you were on the other side, everybody now agrees, as sure as they agree on the color of the sky.
Right.
Well, the first, I'm getting there. The first time that something was given that treatment, the treatment that Trump's had, was in the first episode of political correctness in the 1990s. So in the 1990s, there was a sort of brief flash of political correctness that was quite quickly put down by the counterculture. It came back with a vengeance later. We now live in it. But in that first brief flash of political correctness, that's when you had the old ladies with the big hair on TV saying that Marilyn Manson causes massacres at school, which I find just as ridiculous as people who say that video games cause school shooters. Just as ridiculous as people who say that.
Thank you.
Well, I'm trying to. Not everything has a two-word answer.
But I think it does. All I just want to know is how you plan on...
Well, if you knew the answer, you wouldn't be asking me.
Well, yeah, but you
I think we're done.
keep
Thank
going
you.
in circles.
Hi. So, Destiny, I just want to say I'm a longtime viewer and fan.
Hey, what's up?
Nice to see you in person. As far as all the shit you give about your wife, threesomes are base, dog, so have your fun. Anyways, here's my question. You guys seem to be implying that under Christian nationalism, things would get better. Well, he does. Things get better. I assume that means like crime and things like that. How do you reconcile that with the fact that a lot of the prison population is very low atheist counts?
I'm not a Christian nationalist. I'm certainly not a nationalist.
Dominantly Christian, and a lot of countries like Japan and over in Europe are less religious, and they seem to be more pleasant places to live. So if either of you guys have something to contribute on that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think that religion probably has a really complicated interaction with a person's life in a way that could either predispose you towards crime or could not predispose you, or predispose you against crime, or be a protective factor against crime. So, for instance, if you grew up in a religious family where religion is a centerpiece of the family, but it's also built out to where you've got a strong mother and father, or two parents in the household, you've got a good community of people that also worship. In these types of situations, I'm sure that religion probably functions as some kind of protective factor against committing crime and whatnot. But if you look at prison populations, where people go and they eventually convert, or a lot of people can be violent and still, wear a rosary, which you're not supposed to do, or wear a chain or something that has a cross on it. I think sometimes you can scapegoat religion to do horrible things. I think that it's probably just depends.
You can wear rosaries and crosses. You really can.
On your
Catholics do that.
Engagement with your religion, I kind of view it as an instrument, a tool. You can either do good things through it, like the unbelievable amount of charitable givings and community involvement that churches have, or you can do horrible things with it, like people flying into buildings or going on mass shootings or what have you.
Did you say you're not supposed to wear rosaries?
Have
you never been to Italy?
No, but I was a Catholic for 16
okay.
years, and wearing a rosary was a big no-no. We got in big trouble in school when we did that. But
the answer to your question is race. The reason that there's no crime in Japan is it's entirely racially homogenous and wealthy. That's the answer. The reason that there's a lot of crime in this country is that America messed up emancipation.
What races commit the crimes?
I think we know. But there's a reason for that. There's a reason. Well, let me get to it. Let me get to it. You can clip the good thing.
Pussyfooting about it. Just fucking say it, you coward.
In it,
Pussy, Milo.
this. All right. This country messed up emancipation. What happened in the UK was that, and it feels gruesome to us now to speak in these terms, but property owners, sorry to say, were compensated for their losses. To put it, in those terms, in a sense, emancipation in Europe was a kind of eminent domain, where even if people wanted to grumble about it, they couldn't really say too much because they had got the market value for their house so the railway could be built. In America, they dragged it on for generations. They didn't do that, and then through a combination of incompetence and malice, blacks and whites were.
I mean, slavery in the United Kingdom wasn't so much of a thing, because I think it was like it was William the Conqueror. He put laws against owning, not like laws against owning slaves, but there was like high taxes and levies and stuff. So like the way in which slavery worked in the United Kingdom, it didn't work in the rest of the empire. Like the United Kingdom itself, really, I don't really think had very much slavery, just because the king, for his own political purposes, didn't like the idea of people selling slaves. Long before slavery was abolished. So it's very different. It's a very different situation.
Set against each other in this country, with the result that there is now a permanently grievance-focused 13% of the population. I mean, maybe 1% of the black Americans don't hate everything and everyone, but the rest of them are predisposed toward antisocial behaviors.
Why? Because Because they didn't fucking compensate slave owners. What?
Because they were never welcomed into the pact. They were never properly welcomed.
Just because everyone's still racist, they didn't want to give up slaves in the first place. Like the whole point in like the United States as a country was like the most backward Western country at the time. That's why. It's because racism was far greater in the United States. It's because there was a greater amount. I mean, to be fair, there was a greater amount of economic motivation in the United States, but like it wasn't like a ethical revelation. At least not largely. It was very much like it had to be fought over in a huge war, because it was like a lot of people in the United States that didn't want slavery to end, that they didn't see black people as like. And to be honest, if anything, it was what led to this is the fact that they try to justify slavery for a long time, where they would be like, okay, like while slavery is happening, make pseudoscience and ethical claims which undermine the value of other races. Like that's more of like the problem. I think boiling this down to like slave owners weren't compensated, I think is missing the point. Don't get me wrong. I think there was a massive economic war going on within the United States. I think that, when we talk about slavery, there was, and even the Civil War, there's a lot about people fought not because of slavery specifically, but because of state, like whether states should be able to have their own laws essentially, or whether they should have to give to federal jurisdiction. But then on top of that, there was the fact that the South had a slave population, and the North was industrial, and it sought to like essentially increase its labor force in many ways. Slave owners were compensated, slaves were not. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, to be fair, imagine like that's the thing. Like, imagine coming out of this situation and saying like, what we didn't give slave owners enough. Like, I think that's madness. I think that's actual madness.
Into the American deal, they were never properly given a seat at the table, and they were never properly welcomed in, with the result that they immediately after emancipation, because emancipation was messed up, started voting with their race. They never were welcomed into the American deal, into the pact. They never bought into the values, and they never participated in the process.
I mean, that's just a lie. I think that's largely calling Black Americans un-American. I think that's absolutely ridiculous.
Of being American citizens, so they didn't feel bound by the obligations that other Americans had.
We're just skipping over the Jim Crow laws and all that nasty shit that happened to them, and the fact that they were being abused economically, socially, politically by the majority class. And it has nothing to do with that. It's not that they were simply being absolutely exploited. What's the Perspective Academy spring sale? I'm having a 30% off sale on my course. So if you want to get 30% off my course, An Introduction to Western Philosophy, yeah, check it out. It's in the description. It's also pinned there. So yeah, thanks for asking. but yeah, like it's absolutely ridiculous. Like how you could just boil it down to I think that's absolutely absurd.
Towards one another.
It's overly like, even if that played a role, like, to boil it down to that is what I think is just absolutely disgusting. Yeah, I do teach the course. So, like, it's 17 and a half hours of lectures. There'll be 18 soon because I still need to put one of them up.
Like, jury trials should be based on the facts and not on whether he's black. So, as a result...
I'm probably going to add more to it in the future as well and just keep adding to it. But I'm not sure what module I'm going to add next. But no guarantees yet. I'm sort of dancing with it.
Of things that were done to them a very long time ago, Black America is now in a situation where there's sort of
no problem, man. I understand. Any money I get's going to me gas bill, so I get it, man.
Permanently petulant child constantly lashing out at a mixture of real and imagined grievances. And the answer to your question about crime is simply that. It's race. It's got nothing to do with religion.
Just an interesting addition to that, two researchers, Whitehead and Perry, I didn't know the stat would come in handy, but Black Americans are actually the largest ethnic group in the United States to support some form of Christian nationalism, which I think is really funny after all that.
Yeah, and there's the reason. There are reasons for that. I mean, you've got people who look. It's mostly to do with where black people were and who was there too. So in the South, whether it's Georgia, which is traditionally English, or Tennessee, which is more Scots-Irish, you've got more enthusiastic and more Anglican and more religion that stuck more from basically the Anglosphere versus some of the Dutch places. There's a very good book called American Nations, which kind of explains, by Colin Woodard, that sort of explains the different character of the various chunks of America. The main reason Black America it remains somewhat religious, although the church going doesn't necessarily translate into behavior or social attitudes these days.
Why not?
Well, because they're heretics, because they go to churches that are completely and utterly bonkers, because they don't go to
just revealing the like almost Catholic versus Protestant there a little bit, aren't you, Milo? Like, because they're heretics. All of them, filthy Protestants, cleanse the society.
preachers who tell them about God. They're Pentecostals or Crystal Methodists or some other kind of nonsense.
Crystal Methodists, that's actually quite funny.
The reason that they're not behaving as Christians is because they're not really Christians. But the main reason that they are religious at all is
poverty is a much better predictor of crime than race. I completely agree. Poverty is like in the was it Aristotle said extreme poverty lowers the character of the state. That was 2,000 years ago.
Where they were and how they were when everything came to an end.
The funniest thing is I actually just made that up. I was seeing if he would actually try to talk his way through that, but I totally made that up. Thanks, Milo.
Well, thank you.
I mean, to be fair, like he didn't end up saying anything other than like black Americans are more likely to be, or like more likely to be religious, I think. Which I'm not sure if that's true or not. But yeah, like I guess that's a bit of a got him, right? Like he's like, okay, yeah, well, black Americans are more likely to be nationalists. Christian nationalists. They're just not real Christians. But I think he already had that in mind in some respects, because clearly he's already had to sort of reason through the fact that there are a lot of people who are Christian who are not going to be Christian. I've met a Catholic that he was offended at me calling him a Christian. He's saying only Catholics are Christian. I mean, to be fair, like Leon, I think to be fair, that the way that he's, why would a Catholic be offended that you call him a Christian? I think that's ridiculous. I think there are a lot of people on the other side that, like, Catholics often get sort of, in the United States, we're often seen as not Christians. There's a lot of people in the United States that will refer to Catholics. They'll be like, I'd rather be a Satanist than a Catholic. I'd rather, like, it's the worst religion, like this sort of stuff where it's like, it's not Christian, it's not really Christian. And now and again, you get your Catholics who are like, Protestants aren't Christians. It's rarer because I think I don't know, it's rarer where I am from anyway. Like, I'm not saying it's rare in general. So yeah, like, you get people who just like to think that the only Christians that are sort of shit on them, like.
It doesn't surprise me for a very simple reason, which is that it was black voters who resisted the proposition in California.
I think you're kind of right. Like, he is saying like black. It's more like black people. It's not like black people are bad. I think he is kind of saying that, but he's more saying like black people are bad because they're not American Christians. So in many ways, I think he's saying that they're Christian, but they're un-American. Like, they have the Christianity, but not the nationalism. I think it's just twisted.
About gay marriage, it's not a ridiculous thing. It's not a gotcha to say that blacks are socially conservative. You can make some of the same arguments about Hispanics. Now, the kind of Catholicism they practice is, all mixed up with the hoodoo, voodoo, bruja nonsense. But
what the fuck, man?
It's not in any way a ridiculous thing to say, given that in California, of all places, it was black voters who stopped gay marriage passing. I mean, it's just not a particularly peculiar thing to say. Wouldn't surprise me at all. In fact, one of the reasons that they have to work so hard to get black people into universities is that they don't teach anything that black people actually care about, and one of those is God.
What else do they not care about?
Property rights, bicycle chains, I don't know.
What happens when you die?
That's a good question.
It's a great question. I'd like an answer.
You might find out soon if this event carries on its current trajectory.
Well, one of us
I just
will,
want your personal opinion.
Just Christian terrorism, apparently, now.
I have no idea, to be honest. It's a thing I don't concern myself with. The way that I view it is that, like, we've got one life on this planet. We've got a bunch of people on this planet. There's going to be people that will come after us. I feel like it's good to kind of like put all your efforts into.
I know you can't study religion at university. I don't know what he's talking about. Like, you could go and do like philosophy and theology, like, no problem. In fact, it would be great if more people would do it. Our courses are really usually heavily undersubscribed. Please join universities for us.
Making this life as good as you can for yourself and the people around you. If you want to fixate on like an afterlife or wonder what comes after, I think that's fine. But don't make too many sacrifices for like a guaranteed life here for a hypothetical, afterlife tomorrow.
In all fairness,
I think we can all see the results.
Who you were when I came here, so just out of curiosity, are you an atheist?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
What is nothing?
That's a very challenging question.
A lot of people I have talked to about it say that nothingness is black, right? But that's something, isn't it?
So the challenge of the question is actually in
this is. I think it's best to reflect upon the work of Martin Heidegger here when we're sort of about being towards death as the reflection of the possibility of impossibility. So it's actually the reason that you struggle to conceive of it is because it is the inconceivable.
The words that you use to ask the question betray like how complicated a question is. So for instance, when you say, what is it like to experience nothingness? Or what is a thing? Like what is nothingness? Well, the question presupposes a subject that can observe the nothingness. When you ask what is something, you're saying what is it like to observe something? Or what is it like for somebody to observe something? But obviously if there's nothing, there's not an observer there to observe it. So the question is a bit meaningless. I can't answer what it's like for somebody not to exist and then.
But it's also like it can't be just the fact that there's something there to observe it. It's that there's something that's not there to be observed, right? Like what it is that when nothingness is a negation of something, and that shows the issue because it essentially precludes the idea that there is a lack of something. It's not simply a thing in its own right, which is why, let's say, you get the Parmenidean argument for the necessity of existence or being. what is must be. There must be something at the foundation. There is an indubitability towards existence, because nothingness implies the negation of existence, which already exists. So, like, for you to say that there is existence already precludes the possibility of absolute nothing. So yeah.
And then for that non-existent person's subjective experience of nothingness to be. Like, there's no way for me to, like, meaningfully answer the question.
There's no way for any of us to answer that
I've been
question,
retired too long to understand that.
The answer has been delivered to us a long time ago.
Don't people...
I'm sorry, he went like 3 seconds without talking, so
don't people equate nothingness and black because of darkness and you can't see things at night? It's pretty simple, isn't it?
It's... Who? What?
Sorry?
Okay,
Read can't, I think I heard there.
Anyways,
it's the same reason that up and down have the associations they do with good and evil, because things grow up and die down. It's pretty simple, right?
Destiny, both of you guys have been calling each other terrible names and like being real rude to each other.
Called him names.
To be clear, only in retaliation to him. I came here to play nice tonight. I didn't know he was going to be such a degenerate. Well, I know he's a degenerate, but not in these ways.
No, you didn't.
I just want both of you to know.
He did call him. He called his wife names.
It's his behavior.
He called his children. He called out his children. That's awful. So much worse.
Don't like it's the way that he passes
his wife around. It's the last time I'm sharing a stage with this clown. Go ahead.
Okay, that's fine. Well, I guess
no more charitable donations to this guy. We can leave that to the 5,000 view ministry stuff he does on YouTube now. All right. What were you saying?
Every one of us is a sinner, and you can be saved.
Oh,
the Lord gave His only Son that each one of us can be saved.
Oh, like he's just a Christian. Maybe he just cares about him.
Thank you, sir.
And it's
and he called his wife a fleshlight. I mean, fucking hell, man. You can't. I didn't say anything. It's like, come on, fuck you.
Precisely that. Although I intensely and feverishly despise your life choices, that's precisely the difference between us. Because I will go home and pray for you, and you will go home.
I'll go home and pray for you after I've called your wife a harlot and just fucking besmirched her in front of a live audience and the thousands of viewers online. He described her as a fucking sex toy, a communal sex toy. What an absolute self-righteous dickhead.
A bitch about me on the internet, and that's exactly the difference between
us. You were literally complaining about me in the bathroom 30 minutes ago, Milo. We can see your Telegram. It's public. You know that, right?
What are you talking about? I just separated the des from the tiny. The des, that's all I did. Was I complaining from the bathroom?
Milo, if Christianity is what's going to save us from these mass shootings, since, you said that we've turned away from Christianity and that's why the bad things in the news are happening, why do we have so many Christian mass shooters?
Who? The Christian mass shooters? Who? Name one.
The University of Texas shooting, it was a Catholic.
Okay, so...
I mean, I will say yes, there are bad Christians. I don't think that is a very Catholic thing to do. And they will face comeuppance for that.
We didn't think you'd actually have an example.
I have a list.
Neither did I, because the two problems with this, okay? We live in a Christian country and in a Christian tradition, so everybody kind of like casually calls himself something, regardless of how committed they were. And I think I heard somebody say, where did he go to Mass? And I think what he was getting at was this somebody who goes and listens to the gospel in church every Sunday? Pretty sure it wasn't. Everybody kind
But even if you get people who go to church and do nasty shit, man. Like, it's not about your attendance. It's like, it's not just you turning up. It's about the accord with the ethic.
Like loosely calls themselves Christians in Christian countries, at least.
Yeah, he's going to say that's not a true Christian. It's like, unfortunately, Christians can be criminals. And it's just saying, like, it's like calling a criminal un-American. It's like, I get what you're saying. It's like they're going against the American system. So there's something very un-American about crime. But the way in which they go against the system actually describes better than anything what it means to be an American. And that's why, like, it's the negation of the positive, which can be seen within the universality of the ideological construct, right, within the community. So it's like, no, like the ways in which Catholics are criminals, the ways in which Protestants are criminals, the ways in which, various believers and non-believers and ideological partisans are criminals, it does actually indicate something about the ideology and the fact that they will lean more one way towards acting one way than the other.
Until very recently, But aren't there
no truth
more
Scotsman.
obvious common denominators between all these shooters than religion? For instance, antidepressant drugs. For instance, ready access to firearms. For instance, maybe even you might say their race and their gender. There's stuff that's like much more of them have in common. Way before you get to Christianity, no? Like 7 things they have in common, more than they have Christianity in common, don't you think?
The demographics follow the demographics of the United States. So I don't think there's a common denominator.
So what?
I don't think there's a common denominator between race, gender, whatever.
No, I say the demographics have nothing to do with whether someone's on prescription drugs or not.
But yeah, but he did say race, gender, 7 things.
What? How many mass shooters were on prescription drugs?
Literally all of them.
No.
Aside from, yeah. I mean,
No.
you can't name one that wasn't on something. I mean, I don't have the list with me. I can certainly pull it up if you want. Every mass shooter has been on something.
That is false.
Dylan-
also, I think
Dylan
it's
Roof was
disgusting
on
that
it,
you
but-
came here to our state talking about our children that died in a mass shooting as a political point. That is absolutely vile.
I live
Yeah, man. Yeah, you tell him.
here. I live here, and I go to church here. Excuse me, ma'am. So pipe
Excuse me, ma'am. Why did he go into like? It's like.
down, because I, as a resident of, as I have just as much.
Hey, I think you need to pipe.
Excuse me, I have just as
Pipe down.
as somebody
Why is he putting the accent on? Or why is he getting like?
who lives here. I have just as much standing as you do to talk about the dangers in churches and schools, because I go to church every Sunday. Do you? Because if you don't, I'm at more risk than you are.
No, you aren't.
No, yeah. Oh.
No, you aren't. What
You are not.
Why am I not at more risk than you are? Can I have an argument instead of petulance? No, I can't. You're leaving.
Petulance.
Okay, very good.
Where was the petulance?
Oh, that was indicated by my sarcastic imitation. No, you aren't. That's
I'm
petulance.
talking.
He did turn American.
Then please, where do you go to church, Mom?
I don't go to church.
No, you don't. So if the shootings have happened like quite a lot in churches and synagogues lately, right? Whether it's a right-winger, a left-winger, they're black, they're white, whether they're targeting Christians, they're targeting Jews. Seems to happen quite a lot in places of religious worship lately. Do you go to synagogue or temple?
No, but
Do you go to a mosque?
Do you go to school?
Do you
because
go
it
to-
happens at schools a lot.
Yeah, I'm in one now, but you evidently didn't go here.
I
Wait, are
grew
we in a
up in
school or are we in a
Tennessee.
convention center right now?
Thank you.
I thought we were at a
The
university.
answer to your question is go to Wikipedia.
Did they
look
not
up
let
no
us on
true
the
Scotsman,
university?
Okay, all the Christian shooters that were mass shooters weren't real Christians. Okay, apparently that's the answer.
Well, I think if you look at the manifestos, you can see what motivates them, and in many cases, it is racially motivated. There's no point.
Wasn't one of them like really mad about sinning because he was like a Christian and he was going to like Asian like massage parlors for like prostitutes or something, and then eventually like killed them or something like that. I remember hearing something about that, and it was like because he was like a really fundamentalist Christian, and he kept like he kept going back to the massage parlors, and then like so blamed the massage parlors or whatever, and so like rocked up with a gun. I'm sure there was like, and then people were saying that it was like Asian hate, but it was actually that he was just like a crazy fundamentalist Christian or something.
Point denying it, but I don't recall anybody drawing on early church fathers to justify their massacre of children. Not
Would
for
you
a
say
while, not
that
for a while
there is
anyway.
an ethnic bend to Christian nationalism?
Yes.
Okay, so then,
And I think it's-
who is to say that a mass shooter that cites ethnicity for an inspiring factor for why there's a mass shooter, like why would you not say that Christian nationalism might play a role into that?
I think it's a pity that there does seem to be a sort of racial inflection to Christian nationalism. It's not a dimension of it that I share or care too much about. In my previous life, obviously, I loved and married and settled down with somebody who was not of my own race. And if the people that you choose to hang out with when you don't have to don't establish your racial attitudes, I don't know what would to anyone's satisfaction. So I don't know. I don't love the fact that most of these Christian nationalists seem to be young white guys. But by the same token, I've seen black conservatives, and I think we'll stick with what we have for now.
I don't understand what the fuck he's just said there. Like, he's saying like, okay, mass shooters are typically young white guys, but black conservatives are worse somehow?
Certainly, I do think it's a responsibility of older and better educated Christians and these guys, confessor priests, to remind them that there's no skin color.
I'm just curious, for you
heaven.
personally, if you could choose between 10 million Mexican Catholics coming into this country or 10 million atheist Norwegians.
Well, I'm very racist against Spanish people, so you put me in a bit of a bind. I like blacks, I like whites, I like Asians. I don't love Spaniards, so you put me
What the fuck? What the fuck?
in a bit of a bind. But I would have to come down on the side of Christians no matter where they're from.
Well, that's good, okay.
Oh, okay. I was having fun. This is a question for Mr. Atentacumpo. I was raised Catholic.
I don't know what that is. You're going to have to explain your Bob. I'm sorry.
No, though I don't really know how to pronounce your last name. I'm sorry. I'm not familiar with Greek. My question is, I was raised Roman Catholic. I attended both Latin masses and English language masses up until my sophomore year of college.
Latin masses. So this is a place that's not a fan of the Second Vatican Council. So like this is some American Catholic right now, isn't it?
Just very recently.
Very.
I've also been a homosexual my entire life. I've been attracted to men. I have had exclusively sex with men. All of my relationships have been with men. And I'm very aware of the fact that these homosexual relationships are a sin according to Catholic doctrine. And I'm wondering if you have practical advice for overcoming these things. I'm not interested in whether or not they're sinful.
Like, look, man, like, question the doctrine. You are just as much a member of the church as everyone else. Does it make sense? Like, does it make sense? Are we reading the Bible correctly in relation to how we should love you in relation to your personal experiences? Do you think it's a reasonable thing to ask someone to live a life of celibacy or to live a life in which they have to constantly deny their sexual proclivities to the point in which it can cause genuine psychological issues and engage in forms of self-deprecation? Do you think this is reasonable? Do you think this is loving? Like, this is what we need to ask ourselves here, and I don't think it is.
Are you sincerely...
I'm completely sincere. I mean,
because I will have a real conversation with you. It's just that there's been a particular tone this evening, you know. So
I have been very ironic with you and sarcastic, but this is a completely sincere question.
You can understand why I'm asking.
I totally understand. I mean, we could talk in the bathroom if you'd like, but
definitely.
I'm interested in actual practical applications. I'm not interested in whether or not.
It's quite a short refractory
ethical.
index from mocking someone to saying you want to have sex with them. All right, look. What the church teaches is not that homosexuality in large part is a cluster of symptoms to early childhood trauma. Whether that trauma is having no male role model to look up to, whether it's the failure to form platonic attachments with male authority figures, there's a bunch of.
I think it's like, I don't think that makes sense. I don't think it has to be. I mean, everything is sort of traumatically formed in some respects. I get if we kind of look towards Lacan, but it's not like a sort of specific trauma, I think, that causes homosexuality in terms of, and I don't think Catholic teaching even sort of talks about that. They get sort of steers clear of the psychoanalysis of it. But I think like there is, like Lacan sees homosexuality as always related to the perverse psychological structure, and that doesn't mean perverse in the same way as like the ethical connotations, but rather like the act of disavowal in terms of the way in which you structure your relationship to a rule-based structure, which is why he says like even when, so it's not like a perversity of breaking the norm, because he actually sees it as like this happens even when it is the norm. So even when homosexuality is the norm, it would still be perverse. It's about the structure of the individual's mind, not necessarily about like whether it's normatively correct or incorrect in relation to some sort of doctrine or something like that. And I think that maybe there's something there that could relate. Like, okay, how does homosexuality form? But I don't see what the big deal is anyway. Like, what's wrong with people being homosexual? Like, I think that, or specifically, like, why would we have a problem? Like, what about homosexuality is unethical? I think that you could look towards like certain points in scripture, and I think a lot of the time it's not just like, it's like, why would they have a problem? When you read it, why is there a problem with homosexuality? Sometimes I think it's like maybe a misunderstanding of natural law, but I think other times it's that there's, like, for example, people have societal duties and stuff like that, where it's like, go forth and multiply. Societies need children, and things like that play a role. And I think that what the problem is here is that we often, and Christians are told, like, it says in the Bible not to eat pork, yet Christians eat pork all the time, right? Like, it's not a sort of rule manual where you read it, you get the rules of how you live and blah, blah, blah. You read scripture in relation to love, well, in relation to the unity of scripture, which I would say is love. At least that's what Christianity is about. And so we really have to ask ourselves, like, is this loving? There's a point in which we say, should this even be in the Bible? Yeah, I was raised Catholic. Should this even be in the Bible? In terms of, like, we do, like, the Bible was edited. We know the Bible's edited. The church admits to editing the Bible. Like, there's nothing necessarily wrong with saying, like when we talk about, like, what is the core message? What is the message that's trying to be achieved through Gospels? Like, why the fuck are we coming away with gay bad? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what I really want to know.
Things that can happen, or sexual assault. You're not responsible for what happens to you, but you are responsible for what you do afterwards and what you do with that. And
but I'm looking for practical advice, day-to-day things.
Sure. Well, then you should. The easiest. The first thing.
Men, isn't that like the only thing you can say? I mean, what else can you do?
Easier said than done.
Deliveroo presents.
This is wild, man. This is wild. What? Oh.
I think that the first thing. Look, I'm going to assume that you're being serious, and I'm not going to give you any sort of flippant, frivolous kind of day-to-day whatever. I practiced mortification when I was getting myself out of that. I used hot oil because it's extremely annoying and lasts a really long time, and it kind of like kills any sort of sexual appetite. But the first step...
Negative reinforcement. Is it really going for negative reinforcement?
Before any of that is to figure out why you ended up like this in the first place. Because you weren't born this way. That's sort of 1980s propaganda. There's no gay gene. They would have found it by now. We have mapped the genome. It's not there. Something was done to you, or something was not provided for you. And one or both of those things happened, which produced these feelings. And if you want to get right with God, the first step is to find out what it was, because you might not know and you might not remember. The best place to go for that is a therapist who was trained by any of the sort of descendants of the Joseph Nicolosi school. So Joe Nicolosi is kind of like the sort of godfather of... they call it reparative therapy now. And his son is still active and they still train.
I agree. I think there's too much focus, I think, on whether you're born gay, as if it matters. Exactly. Why the fuck would I care? Like, let's say someone's gay because of their childhood, right? They've developed, something in their development has made them gay, bisexual, whatever. Yeah, right. Is it worth torturing them to, like, correct this behavior? What's incorrect about the behavior anyway? Like, what's wrong with being gay? Like, you could say, like, maybe you could make an argument if you can show that it contrasts some other duty. But is it really contrasting any other duty?
Therapists, and within quite a short space of time, they will help you to find an answer. And there are a variety of therapies that look to the observer extremely funny, that nonetheless do work. And I'll let you discover what some of those are for yourself. But there's a path out if you want it. Almost everybody can reach celibacy if they are sincerely committed to it. And the numbers vary from like 10 to 20%.
Celibacy, yeah, you can reach celibacy. Right, that sounds like a fucking good idea. Seems to be doing Milo the world of good here. I think he was a much better debater when he was just openly gay.
and people who successfully manage to enter into a relationship with a woman, have an active sexual life, and have children. Somewhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 5
I'm sorry,
gay
is
people are able to do that.
celibacy the best case scenario for a homosexual?
For a lot of people, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vosh.
Same joke.
Again,
Hey, Destiny. So you had a great talk with the Muslim extremist Quarantos about how his great audio quality and good takes about how Muslim nations are greater than Christian nations. I want to ask Milo how you would implement Christianity when they are barely holding on to their legitimacy, when Islam is gaining traction and while Christianity is taking D-list celebrities that take cock, well, at least if 20 years ago, or 20 minutes ago.
What the fuck is going on, man? Like, you're the audience, right? You're not even supposed to be that fucked up, right? Like, can't be going like, like Christianity's taking what the fuck is this, man? That's so weird.
Okay, I'll ignore the last bit. Catholicism and Islam are both growing, and the reason for that seems to be that people correctly intuit that if a belief system or a club, a society, a way of life kind of demands nothing of you, then it's probably not worth very much. So people are very, it's one of the reasons that Protestants are so kind of ideologically promiscuous. Church hopping happens when all you have to do is just show up, listen to a preacher for 45 minutes, listen to...
I think we're probably right. It's the combination of Destiny's audience and Milo's audience at this university in Tennessee. It is just opened a gateway for terrible autistic jokes.
Some nice music and go home. People don't get very much out of it because there's not really much to get out of it. Islam and Catholicism are quite demanding, and they ask a lot of their followers. In the world we live in today, it's no surprise that they're both growing. You say implement like it's the death penalty or something. What I would suggest is that America rediscovers its founding principles, which are not untrammeled freedom. Freedom of religion in America was designed to avoid Protestant wars. It wasn't so Muslims could take public office. And that should be reversed, and it should be against the law. If you live in America and you're a servant of the people in America, you should be a church-going Christian. It ought to be a rule. But something happened in 1776 that I don't think was necessary, and it was probably a mistake, when that ugly sedition occurred.
Man, is actually just obscene. Like, it is just obscene.
Instead of just throwing out the
do you think Obama would have been banned from office just from the allegations?
king, America threw out religion as well, dissociating it from the state, guaranteeing freedom of religion, which is intended just between Protestants.
I will say there's no possibility of actually removing religion from the state. You cannot do it. It's not because the religion in the state can't be institutionally isolated. Fair enough, but rather that the state and religion cannot be truly isolated as so long as the voters, the politicians, the actors within the state are religious or non-religious, respectively. You can't actually make that hard line, just like a church here, state here.
Some denominations, but of course would always blossom out, and then it sort of enshrined the right to commit various infractions against the Ten Commandments, including the First Amendment. I think if you want to sort of reinstitute things, all you really need to do is to return to an understanding that none of this stuff works without Christianity. And one of the ways to communicate that would probably be to reestablish maybe Presbyterianism or Episcopalianism, probably the Episcopal Church, I would guess, since that's the one that most of the presidents seem to go for. It's the church Tucker goes to. It's the National Cathedral in Washington. Most of the elites in the country are pretty happy with Episcopalianism.
Isn't Biden a Catholic?
You get back home to the real religion eventually, but let's start with that. It seems to me that should be quite quickly reestablished so that all public bodies operate not only in the name of...
just throwing his Catholicism, Catholic nationalism, you'll all return.
America, but in the name of God. And then if you want to be elected to any kind of public office, you have to be Christian.
Well, how would they implement that? Or you don't like the word implement because it sounds like you're forcing them, but it seems like average Americans don't even care about their Christianity and don't even relate their morals to how good their lives are.
Well, I don't know. Like, there's a massive amount of people like vote in relation to that church. There's just a lot of secular people in the United States now. I think it's like 45% of like voters or something are Christian. I think 30% are church-going Christians, but many of them do vote in line with that. But yeah, to say that they don't care about that religion, I think it's like atheists would care if they're religious. I think with the way that like new atheism, like kind of the way that it kind of, especially like the people who are online and stuff, kind of would think as well.
People know if you're a Christian. I mean, they know if you show up to church. There's a sort of only when you take God out do you need like social credit scores, because no one's really like paying any attention to each other. So you have to kind of have this like weird Orwellian technological horror show where technology tries to piece together information about a person to figure out if they're okay or not. Everybody in your parish knows if you go to church or not. If you run for public office and you don't go to church.
I don't go to church enough, man. I can't believe I'm not going to be allowed to be a politician. Like, I have to be like, I'm really sorry I missed Mass. I didn't mean to miss Mass. Like, I miss everything. Like, you know, like, it's just like, come on, man. It's fucking ridiculous. What if you miss Mass because you're trying to be a politician?
You're not eligible. And then the onus, you know, falls to you to prove that you are what you purport to be. That doesn't seem to me to be a problem. Anyone who goes to the regular local parish will know that. If you're a Christian, people know. People know when you go to church.
Milo's
and it's
lost his fucking mind. I just want to point that out. I'm a Catholic right now, and I think Milo's lost his fucking mind. Like
a gentler and more sophisticated, and I think more normal form of kind of social currency and social capital than the the horrific Chinese version.
Well, that sounds almost as feasible as communism, so I appreciate you and good luck with your future endeavors.
All right, boys, I'm going to try to ask 2 pointed questions to try to get some dubs for y'all. So, Milo, at some point you mentioned Dutch paintings. It immediately made me think of the Calvinists around the time period that you're kind of advocating to go back for. And their biggest thing that they advocated for was they were very business oriented, but their simplicity and modesty were the values that they valued the most. How would you kind of reconcile in a transition to a society that has a Christian nationalist government the American values of excess and stuff like that, you know, to the modesty Christian value that's really important? Yeah.
I don't think those were the American values until very recently. I mean, for the first 250 years of this country, precisely that kind of modesty obtained. Look at the 1950s. You know, you've got there's an ethos of humility, of service, of family orientation. Right? America is kind of a Calvinist country. I mean, you go to Catholic churches; they don't feel like Catholic churches in Europe. They don't feel like it's certainly not like Italy. But it's nothing like France. It's nothing like the UK. America, wherever you go.
Italians think that the only Catholics, I mean, Nana used to say that. She'd be like, oh, look at the Italians. They should be like Luads and stuff. She'd be like, look at them. They think that the only Catholic.
It is kind of Calvinist. There's a sort of over-earnestness. There's a sort of flavor of slight humorlessness sometimes, you know, sort of taking everything very, very deeply seriously and being incredibly wounded by it and taking everything just like, you know, everything is the apocalypse. And it's a very Calvinist kind of flavor to things, and it's why? Because so many areas in America that now hold the reins of prestige culture are Dutch. You know, that's why, because they come from precisely the place you're saying. So I don't think that American values were ever really of excess. I think that's something that has emerged. It's something that's been thrust on Black America as well. These sort of very degenerate, self-destructive social attitudes.
And the thing is that like it's like he doesn't see that like maybe like don't get me wrong, maybe the American values have degenerated, but why have they degenerated? Why have they degenerated into this? What about the American society led people to largely reject religion and turn to consumerism? What about this situation was meaning that they were gaining psychological satisfaction, or they weren't happy in their lives, that they sort of moved away from spirituality to more towards like a hedonistic self absorbed way of being, right? Like it and I think like Hegel's a really great philosopher for this, because he shows like it's like people don't like the problem with abstract religion, abstract universalism, is that people they're not actually being respected in it. That they're not being cared for, they're not being looked after, they're not actually living good lives. And for example, there may be gay people that have to be celibate just to be socially accepted, or the people who are like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of another good example in which Christian ethics have sort of unreasonably restricted people. Maybe it's the sort of prudishness around sex that was very dominant, in which people are like, told to like hide sex away and not, be okay with sex. But now you have the Pope coming out saying like, sex is given by God. And this is like the progress of Christianity, and Catholicism's enduring that because of this, because it's willing to progress. Might be slowly progressing, but it progresses. Like, to say that like we should go back to the 17th century and not recognize that, well, you're just going to end up with the same problems again, just in a couple of hundred years' time. I think misses the fact that this is a logical, like, two-step relationship from universality to particularity, where people are giving away religion or going away from religion because they're not finding the answers to their problems in religion. And then they turn back to religion because they're trying to cope with the problems that have been caused from the hedonism. And this two-step can only be really resolved in philosophical religion, where people are spiritual, rationally spiritual.
That pop up in the music and the culture, all the rest of it. I don't think there's anything particularly American about that. America's basically British. And with that dash of Calvinism in from the Dutch up top, that's basically been the sort of central conflict of America. And
the thing is, America might be very British, don't get me wrong, but if you look at the Brits who moved to America, even in terms of the Protestants, there were more radical Protestants. Like, there were the more radical Protestant sects that initially went and settled America. It wasn't your average, like, Church of England, sort of Catholic light Protestant. It was like Puritans and fucking Baptists and stuff like that, that maybe took things a little bit too far. Some people went just to persecute. Like, you've got to remember this. Like, people didn't just go to America to flee persecution. There was problems with persecution, actually. That is another thing to be saying. There are, like, the Baptists and stuff were being persecuted. Like, the Edict on Tolerance, I don't think had been made yet. So people were fleeing persecution in Britain for being with certain Christian denominations. And then others went to persecute. So, like, the Christian denominations aren't necessarily reflective of the United Kingdom's sort of overall, like, the way in which the United Kingdom developed, which is why it developed radically differently, right?
All of America, even after the Civil War, kind of remained basically, vaguely, mostly Anglophone, mostly Anglo, although Americans don't like to think of it like that. But that Calvinist attitude, which also, by the way, gives rise to Puritanism and purity tests, and cancel culture, is the thing that obtains in the Dutch areas, the Yankeedom, New York. None of this has anything really to do with excess. Excess is a modern phenomenon that's driven by runaway.
The thing is, I think that he could have been onto something if he had have just been willing to say, like, look, if he had have said, like, this is the logical development of various Christian sects, and you try to show, like, maybe, like, perhaps we're giving into the vices of excess and deficiency in some points in terms of what reasoning. That would have been a genuinely interesting political thesis. And he's managed to turn it into, like, calling Destiny's wife a fleshlight and just being an absolute dick and making an absolute tit of himself. And then also calling for some sort of, like, tyrannical, evil, authoritarian regime, which is inherently un-Christian.
Capitalism, and by a small group of people highly motivated to wreck the place.
Thanks, Mel. I appreciate that. This one's for Stephen over here. So in your talk today, you mentioned sort of like America's need a return to spirituality that can kind of lift people up from addictions to their phones, stuff like that, that can kind of, not a religious center to keep people on a moral level, but it almost sounds like you're arguing for like a re-faith in the American process. I know that you're big on canvassing. I drove some minions to your canvassing in Georgia. What would be your answer to like first steps to try to?
This guy has had has been the most good faith person in this entire event. Like, bless his cotton socks, man.
People's political faith and stop the fracturing too much.
Yeah, I think one of the huge things that we have right now is political fracturing, and I think the political fracturing has made it impossible for anybody to be proud of the country because like even things that we do that I think are amazing like become hardcore politicized. So this is a risky one in Tennessee. I don't know how much the audience is mind, but like I would consider, for instance, like the development of the mRNA vaccines. I think that that is like a championing of the American project. That was capitalism at its best, with Trump doing the warp speed thing to use the government to incentivize like a company that was working with other companies all over the world to engineer and create a vaccine in like less than 1 year for a novel virus. That's something that I would hope that like every American would be like, that's really cool that we did that we were able to do it that fast. You know, I know Trump wants to take credit for it, and I think he should get some credit for it because I think the warp speed was a good idea. You know, he guaranteed money for those companies to take the risk to make those vaccines. But because we're so hardcore politicized, we can't take credit for that. It becomes a political issue where, you know, even the political party that existed under Trump now hates the vaccine, and then liberals have their thing with the vaccine. It feels like every single, the intervention that we did with Ukraine, I think was really amazing. I think the fact that Ukraine was a country that looked like it had no opportunity whatsoever to stand up to Russia, and with NATO intelligence, with US leadership in NATO, I think we've done something amazing there, but we've helped them largely on their own. I mean, it's not US lives that are being lost, you know, not to take any credit from Ukraine. That's something that I think is really amazing that America's done.
Am I going to comment on the capitalism thing? I mean, yes and no. Like, I think that like the reality is that capitalism has some redeeming qualities. It is capable of, it is capable of like when governed correctly, incentivizing and rapidly producing incredible outcomes. I don't think that's necessarily something endemic of capitalism. Is rather it really just shows the sort of the benefits of a market economy. Which does not necessarily have to be capitalist, you know, like I would argue. But I do think that, like, you know, like I think it would be like I'm a socialist, right? Like I do believe in like progressing beyond capitalism, but I think it would be nonsense to not see the veracity of capitalism as a system, and it's not entirely irredeemable. There are things in capitalism that I'd certainly want to keep, and largely the veracity of the markets is like, you know, that Stephen kind of mentioned there, the capacity to get things done and motivate large swaths of people who are otherwise unconnected to events, you know, through a shared common sort of currency. Literal currency is, I mean, it's impressive, right? I think that the main issue is the lack of sort of ethical unity that it has, and the promotion of individualistic needs and egoism that is sort of inherent with it that I have a problem with. Not necessarily just the market side of things. I think that socialists need to learn how to improve upon markets, better markets, and I think that the fact that it motivates individual actors under their own accord rather than necessarily forcing motivation through some sort of government mandate, I think is something that Marxist-Leninists should probably learn from. Things like that. So I think that there are positives. Like to say that capitalism is inherently evil. Like I know people love to say that capitalism's evil. It's got no good. It is nonsense. It's like even Marx understood it to be like a political revelation or So it's not this. It's not something that should be just like, oh, it was shit and then we should get rid of it. Thoughts on Mark Fisher's capitalist realism? I don't really know much about it. I'm really sorry. I can't really answer much about that. I'll go look it up, do more reading on it, and then get back to you, Rolls. But I'm really sorry that I've not got an answer for your question after you donated. I feel like a terrible person now. But because I'm such a capitalist, I am not going to refund you. I don't even think I can, but I wouldn't if I could.
Even things like Bush's programs to fight AIDS in Africa, or Bill Gates, funding for malaria in Africa. All of these things, I think, are really amazing projects that America's done, that all of us, irrespective of our political differences, should be able to look and go, oh, that's really cool. I'm American. America did that, and I feel really proud of it. But nobody does, because instead these are like all political pawns to use and our little arguments on Twitter and stuff for us. So to return to your question, I don't like anybody that says a return to anything, because it feels a bit fantastical. I don't know of any society that's ever like said, okay, well, we're going to undo the last 50 years of progress and go back to this thing. I don't think it really works that way, especially with how much technology has changed everything. So
I think Destiny's right about that. You can't really go back. You can't put the genie in the bottle. Like,
we need to be forward-looking, not looking into the past. And I think that forward-looking thing, it has to be with less division, because
people imagine an alternative to capitalism. Oh yeah, like 100%. Like I think it might even be him who originally said the quote. I don't know who originally was it said it. I know the Zizek paraphrases it, where he says it's easier to imagine an end of the world than it is an end of capitalism. I'm unsurprised, because I think like obviously capitalism is the dominant ideology, and the reason for that, and I think Zizek talks about this, is largely because it's what we see through. The structure of capitalism really is the structure of the consumer, and the structure of the consumer is the psychology or the structure of an individual who seeks their interests in material objects, in a fetishistic idea of subject-subject relations, which shows a proclivity for excess. That's the structure of the sort of capitalistic individual. The structure was not Mark Fisher was in the book. All right, okay. But yeah, like, so I think that's yeah. I mean, like I totally see that, and I think that that it requires a kind of psychological deconstruction, which is the difficult part about it, where you really have to analyze yourself and then think about like how you ought to have been. Not in the kind of weird, crazy way that I think Milo would look towards this, where we should deconstruct in order to establish these sort of like messed up doctrinal values, but rather if anything, the complete opposite. How do I maintain all of the grace that exists within the system, all of the goodness, all of the love of myself that I can obtain in capitalism, and then go beyond that? How can I love myself more? How can I love the other more? That's what I really wish to see. And I think for that, you would see that, you know, you might have to simply limit some of your desires. You might have to reconcile yourself to others in a way which shows that they are of equal value, of the same substance, have equal worth, and that certain things in your life cannot be given priority to aspects of other people's lives. You know, so a mediation of positive and negative responsibility that changes us away from this sort of liberal conception of the self.
The more divided we are, the more impossible it is for us to kind of all collectively like work and vie towards one particular thing, which in my hope would be like the American project, you know, however differently we all view it.
I just have a quick follow-up question to that. So
yeah, go
a lot of the wins that you mentioned were not specifically American government wins. Like a lot of those are private companies, like the mRNA vaccines. Like, yeah, it's a great marvel of science, but a lot of that were, you know, they got funded, but it was private companies that did that. It wasn't the American government that made it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but those companies existed in America for a reason. And a lot of the public research that had already been done on like the mRNA process, that stuff spans back to, I think, like the 80s, where people were starting to do that. So we do a lot of public funding for general research. And then we had private American companies. But you're right, it wasn't just the American government. But I mean, I'm an American. As Americans, we hate the government, right? I know in Tennessee you guys hate the government, right? Yeah, I'm not saying that like the American government has to do it. I'm saying America as a country has to do it. And sometimes that can be our biggest companies. But, you know, like I said before, like it feels like now everybody fucking hates our biggest company. Nobody likes Facebook. Nobody likes ExxonMobil. Nobody likes fucking any huge American company. We all like shit on our companies, and those are like some of the largest things we built as Americans. And it's like, well, fuck. Like, yeah, I don't know. It just feels like we're in an area where, I'd be super curious. I did this with Adam Sosnick when I was on his podcast last. Like, when you ask people, like, what are you proud to be an American for? That's a really difficult question to ask a lot of people. I think when I ask my parents, like, I'll get things like, like winning the Cold War or stuff from like decades and decades ago. And I was like, okay, well, in the past, like, I should be able to say in the past 5 years, really. But like at least in the past like 10 or 20 years, you know, like, are you proud to be an American? You know, people on the left will complain about colonialism and white.
To be fair, I can't think of, there's very little to be proud of these days in general. I think often with the way that society's developed, it's not that there aren't good things happening, but that there's a lot of bad things. And like, I think we're more critical. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that being critical, like, is a good thing, though. It's what makes a country better than it would otherwise be. The problem is the divisions in the country, the fact that we're not really critical of ourselves, but we're critical of each other. And then there's also the cynicism where we believe that things can't change.
White supremacy and people on the right, well, now all they complain about is trans people, but like it just feels like we have nothing that we can kind of all say like, okay, yeah, you know, it sucks that we fought, but like in '69 we went to the moon. Like we don't have our moon launching now. Oh, I guess aside from the vaccines, I'll give one more example so I'm not too partisan. Elon Musk, I hate that guy, okay? I really do. But Tesla's really fucking cool, and so are the rockets. SpaceX is really cool. Having the rocket come back to the planet is a really fucking cool thing. When we first saw that, I don't know how many people watched that first stream. That was like the coolest fucking thing ever. And
it actually is a really fucking cool thing. It actually is one of the, what it is like a proud leap forward in tech.
This was after we were shipping our astronauts over, I think, to China or Russia to fly on their fucking shuttles to get up to the International Space Station. But that's something like you can't be proud of, because now if I say like, I don't like Elon Musk, but like SpaceX and Tesla are pretty fucking cool. That's like a political talking point now. It's like, wait, you support the white supremacist guy that wants to, bring people like Milo and me back to Twitter? Like, I don't know. Just the political division makes it impossible for us to have like this shared idea of what it means to be American and what we should be proud of. And I think we need to work on getting that back.
I think people like stuff that's good and they don't like stuff that's bad. People don't uniformly hate the government even here. I mean, people know that there are militarized police forces that are a bit sinister. They also know that the local sheriff, if you get pulled over by the sheriff, you're probably okay because they're mostly reasonable people. They're able to distinguish between the government doing its job really well, which doesn't happen very often anymore, and the government doing its job really badly, which happens almost everywhere. And the success of private enterprise in this country is because the government failed. It's not a sign of success, it's a sign of failure. The success of SpaceX tells us only that NASA is more interested in giving Muslims self-esteem about scientific achievements in the Muslim world, where they still think that nuclear reactors are powered by genies and fairies.
I mean, it has nothing to do with the fact that the amount of money that is required, the initial investment into SpaceX, for example, was massive, or the idea itself, although it didn't actually come from Elon Musk. It came from like other side. It came from like some. Like it was like other work that had already been like built upon. But that this is innovation. Innovation's incredibly expensive. It's incredibly difficult to do. You can't just like the when you're looking for public returns, right? Like NASA, and maybe like this is a genuine valid criticism of how the government looks towards using public funds, and that it could learn from private companies. Private companies take risks, right? And they take risks to innovate. And then something happens and it's like, boom, wow, the world's changed, right? The only time the government does that is if it's trying to defeat another government. Let's be honest, right? It's like the space race or some shit. Or it's like it's like a war or something like that, where you see the same innovative, creative human element coming out because they're motivated to gain some greater return than just another rover or just like another mission, and they're willing to put time, money, and really try to make this better because they realize that, and it's just this bullshit fear from re-election in terms of like, oh well, what happens if it fucks up, and it's like you need to inspire people to be proud of even the fuck ups, right? Like, which we tried, at least we fucking tried, and I think that to be fair, I think that it is a genuine criticism, you could say, from I think of the government in this, but I think that this, if anything, lends credibility to Destiny's position in some respects, where he's like, look, we're not trying anymore because we're not happy with who we are. But yeah.
That's what NASA spent its time doing under Obama. No shit, you can't get to the moon anymore.
True, like, private companies take huge risks when they just get bailed out by the government. And the government's okay with that, but they're not okay with risking it because, well, they wouldn't get re-elected.
The shackles off private corporations so they can rape and ruin us all is, of course, going to produce some interesting and impressive economic phenomena. But more often than that, it's going to produce horrors. The vaccine is a horror. This sort of thing, I mean, I don't know how to respond to somebody who thinks that the vaccine is a good idea. My communist friends no longer think that it was a good idea.
I mean, you could try with evidence. I know that it's painful for you, but...
The evidence of what? The fact that the most vaccinated countries in the world, the ones where everyone's dropping dead, the fact that it was never a problem in the first place, the fact that we should only ever have asked the old people to maybe stay in for a few months. I mean, you talk about Orwellian tyrannical horror. You have nothing to fear from Christians, but you have a lot to fear from people who want to lock you, screw you into your houses, and force medicine into you until you can, and then tell you can't go back to work otherwise.
Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm highly critical of the vaccine. Like, I actually am. I think specifically, not necessarily the vaccine in and of itself, because I'm not really sure, but rather the way in which it was handled, at least in the UK. The data wasn't released to the NHS, and I thought that was really fucked up. Like, why is this not being peer reviewed by the NHS? And I thought that was fucked up. The fact that they lied in relation to some of that data, the fact that it was handled by corporations which had a track record of being untrustworthy, that sort of stuff was fucked up. The UK was an absolute but yeah, like it really was. It was there was a lot of problems in the UK. There really was a lot of problems in the UK. So like, you can't really come out of it and go, oh, like they handled that well. It's like, no, not really. Do I think the vaccine was largely a good thing? Probably. I mean, like, let's be honest. Like, it seems that it actually saved a lot of lives. Like, people aren't dropping dead more from the vaccine than they were from the disease, and we see that the places that largely had lost a lot of people, they did lose a lot of people. What did they lie about? It was in relation to their trials, the fudged some of the data in their trials. Endo, it was like Pfizer that like came out and said, like, I don't know if it was like misrepresented data or some shit, but it was bad. Yeah, it shouldn't have happened. I don't think people should be forced to take the vaccine. No, I think that's wrong. I think that's a breach of bodily autonomy. I don't think you can force medications onto people. I think that, but yeah, I don't think that, but I think that like largely the vaccine was like a good thing compared to just getting like a sort of like I don't know, like the Swedish approach or the like what we're seeing. I mean, to be fair, it's hard to compare it against other civilizations that simply couldn't vaccinate, right? Like the simply couldn't vaccinate in the sense that it was actually the Swedish approach was more of like lockdowns, but the countries that couldn't vaccinate also had failing medical systems in the first place, right? So it's kind of like hard to compare against. But largely, I think it was probably the right thing and a good thing. Do I think it's perfect? No. Do I think it probably has some severe side effects? I think in some cases it clearly does. But like largely it was probably medically necessary that we did it. Do you know what I mean? Like it's kind of the way like these things happen. I don't think there's any medication that's sort of been invented that didn't have the like sort of side effects. I don't think forced vaccination is based. I think you should have education programs and then let people make their own mind up. I don't think that you should have forced vaccination. That's wrong. And you're breaching people's autonomy. Yeah, the millions on the COVID tracking app, that was awful. Like the Nightingale hospitals that were like really shit and didn't work or whatever. And there's loads of shit. Just blew money. Like this is why the UK is suffering now, because we just blew money. It was like, and it's gone. That was it.
That's
debate me on vaccines, PP. What about it? I agree with vaccines. Do you mean vaccine mandates?
Not private enterprise. That's a drug cartel. And that's what America has, because America hasn't really had properly functioning capitalism for quite some time. It's got nepotism. It's got all kinds of deeply, deeply corrupt late-stage sort of intertwining of government and business. And all of that is a sign of the failure of government, not the success of America.
If Christian nationalism were to succeed, God willing, what measures would need to be taken to make sure it wasn't subverted? You mentioned that in order to run for public office, you need to be Christian, but like what policies specifically?
This guy scares us. He's already on the fascist line of thinking like, and how do we prevent the counter-revolution?
Specifically,
should hire like the Chinese government looking for employees.
Would need to be taken in order to make sure Christian nationalism wasn't subverted in America?
I mean, you can't know another man's heart, so you can never know if somebody is all that they claim publicly to be. But when we elect politicians, it kind of doesn't matter. That's really a matter for their consciences and for God, because if somebody looks like a Christian, acts like a Christian, goes to church and says Christian things on TV, passes Christian laws, invites Christians to the White House when they get elected. I mean, Trump, I'm under no illusions about Trump being some kind of religious leader. Give me a break. This is not somebody who can lead a kind of authentic religious revival in politics. No. But he was very good to Christians, first president to show up for the March for Life, first president to invite the number of evangelical preachers that he just was, and so on and so forth. I think that's good enough. That's fine. So as long as somebody is, doing all the stuff they're supposed to be doing, what they do in their private life.
So why are they got to be Christian? Like, why couldn't we just make it based on policy?
If they're elected officials, as long as they are not letting those values spread into the way they govern, we can afford, at least at first, to be relatively lenient about. Later, who knows? But no, I mean, if somebody, like I say, if somebody acts and governs and passes laws like a Christian, I think people will know if they're Christian.
Right. No, I was asking about what those actual policies would be after those Christians were elected, to make sure that it wasn't subverted in the future.
Well, I see. Well, so it works relatively well in Europe when you have an established church, right? So the head of state is also the head of, whatever heretical sect of Christianity.
For the love of God, don't do that. Just don't do that.
Christianity, you're under. But no, I mean, America kind of spiraled out of control in about 300 years. But most of these European countries were stable for 1,000, 2,000. It worked pretty well when you have an established church.
I mean, when was the Protestant Reformation? It wasn't 1,000 years ago. Like. Like 1500s, so the Pope was the head of the church for all of these Christian nations, really, until around about, for the majority of them, for around about until 500 years ago, really. Yeah, and then I don't think all of them made themselves into. Specific geolocated churches with heads of state. So
that government does things in the name of the monarch and in the name of God, right? So I know that this is a sort of a slightly alien concept in this country by design, but things kind of work better when people are reminded, as my friend acknowledged, that there's something greater than themselves. And those public rituals, whether it's royal weddings or the fact that everything important that happens in a nation's life happens in a church, it sort of has
don't use the Lord's name again. I probably shouldn't. I'm terrible for that.
An effect on the country. It has a really powerful effect on change for change's sake. People are much less likely.
I'd probably guess that most of the audience is atheist. I probably would. I didn't build my brand on being a Christian.
To do stuff like that. And if you look at, sort of where the great dramas happen of particular countries, America, it's the courtroom, right? We come to know ourselves in America through court cases. We don't talk about abortion, we talk about Roe v. Wade. The way that we know there's a problem with Black America is the OJ trial, right? That's when white America realizes, oh, we have a problem here. America's kind of forum for national dramas is legalistic.
How did O.J. Simpson give us an idea that there was a problem with Black America? Can someone explain that? It was a narcissistic psycho kills his wife, and it's Black America's fault.
Courtroom, and that's because it's wrenched down from heaven. And it's wrenched down from the monarch, it's wrenched down from anything ineffable, anything untouchable, anything aspirational. It's much more easily corrupted.
Atheists for PP, Christians for PP, that's everyone for PP. Agnostics for PP.
So I think reestablishing the church as making America's official national religion and language and culture to be Western European Christian, it seems to have worked quite well for Europe. And I don't know if you can really ask of any civilization that lasts more than 2,000 years.
Real quick question. Would you outlaw usury in the United States?
Personally, if I stumbled into Pennsylvania Avenue as president, it would probably be my first executive order.
Thank you.
Hello, Milo. When you were the champion
What did he say? He would outlaw?
of campus free speech in 2015-2016, I was a big fan, and I appreciate your work. And as a fellow convert to the Catholic Church, I was really encouraged to hear about your interest in the faith. But I have some genuine and serious concerns about some of
Okay, so the action or practice of lending money at unreasonably high rates of interest.
your comments that you've stated today. There is a strong
I didn't know. I've never even heard of that word, man. I've never actually heard that word before. I'm learning. Essentially, it's essentially like a loan sharking as the government or something, right? Or as like a lender.
tradition in the church of
To be fair, I think that it actually should be outlawed. I think that it should be illegal. Like for example, payday loans. Fuck payday loans. Sorry, I shouldn't really swear. It's disgusting. It's absolutely awful. Like people in the most desperate situations getting like incredibly high interest rate loans. Like, come on, man, it's not okay.
dating back centuries, that culminated in the Second Vatican Council in the document Humani Dignitatis, that squarely condemned some of the things that you attribute to this vision of Christian nationalism as heresy. Could you? And I'll closely paraphrase because I don't have photographic memory, So this infallible ecumenical council stated that in its document proclaiming proclaiming religious freedom, that the truth can only proceed or succeed by the merits of its own truth and not by coercion. So could you comment on these teachings?
Absolutely. And
There's what Catholic boy.
look, absolutely. And nobody's suggesting that we're going to be instituting a Gestapo or anything like that, because that's an Enlightenment atheistic kind of thing.
How is that an Enlightenment atheistic kind of thing? Okay, yeah, oh, right, like the word atheists, right? We could say they're atheists, but how is that anything to do with the Enlightenment? Like this is modern. It's certainly not the Enlightenment. Like what the fuck? Like why did Immanuel Kant do this?
It's entirely, as you will know, necessary for our salvation that we have the freedom to choose the wrong thing, as much as we have the freedom to choose the right thing. But that doesn't mean that in Christian countries there aren't incentives in the tax system, laws against certain things. Though we must, for our salvation, have the freedom to choose the right over the wrong, that doesn't mean that in a Christian country that murder should be legal. It doesn't mean that abortion should be legal. We must have laws and rules in order to have a functioning society that exist as much to circumscribe the proper behavior of those citizens as it does to, ideally safeguard their souls. So no, I completely agree with you that people must have as much freedom as is practicably possible. But the Catholic Church is a very prescriptive religion that requires a lot from people. And the rules that it lays down for followers aren't optional. And in those countries that have...
Yeah, but it doesn't force them through political violence, man. Like, it doesn't force them through, like, a monopoly of violence. That's the whole point. And then, the fact that you would deny someone political representation because they don't, like, they're unwilling to conform to your idea of Christianity, like, that seems to go against exactly what the church is really talking about. You're not allowing someone freedom of religion because if you're taking away that freedom of expression, you're coercing them. Maybe not through, let's say, like authoritarian means like the Gestapo, but through political and ideological means.
Have had explicitly Catholic governments and monarchs in the past, that attitude has tended to proliferate out into lawmaking. So I agree with you on coercion to a point. I don't think we should be frog marching people to church or we shoot them. No one's ever suggested that. But we should make more things illegal that aren't illegal right now.
Destiny kind of mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to get some more expansion on it. With the effects of globalization and our culture, particularly religiously, a part of America's identity is kind of being this melting pot of the world. How would we realistically impose religion nationwide without cutting off the American people from the rest of the world? Present day, how it is, we're so interconnected, and how is it plausible to cut us off and mandate a religion when the rest of the world is working toward a more diverse religious scene, and when doing this essentially kind of create a border between the US and the rest of the world?
I thought that was for you.
Wait, was that for him?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, let's do that.
I'm sorry. Well, I'll just give you an example. I would have to look up the reference, but I think about 10 years ago, the Chinese government dispatched a number of operatives to America to figure out, like, what is it that's made America so preeminently successful? Why are we now in this unipolar world where there's America and everything else, right? Because it can't just be this American exceptionalism thing. Obviously, they didn't believe that. They turned their nose up at that. They said, well, what is it? Let's get to the bottom of this. And the guy came back, the lead researcher that the CCP dispatched, came back with an interesting answer. It was Christian heritage. The guy ended up converting to Christianity. He said,
that's actually based as fuck.
the thing that makes America
I hope that's true.
successful is precisely that heritage against which it's constantly kind of bucking. That it's always sort of fighting against. And it's that
No, I do actually think that the reason why the West is I think it's a good part. I think what Christian heritage is really good. I don't think there's to sort of quote Destiny why we're so ashamed of being Christians. You know what I mean? It has been largely a good thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with being Christian and being proud of it and being happy the fact that even if you're not a Christian, to say look, actually Christianity was a significant ideological development in history that shouldn't be taken lightly, and that it as a religion led to many great things. It really did. And ideology, I mean, Western science being one of them, right?
tension within the limits as sort of proscribed by the founding documents that has made America so successful. It's freedom arising from order. It's creativity arising within clearly defined limits. What's happened since then is that those limits have been taken away, both for private corporations, so they can do appalling things to people and abuse and addict us to various things, and obviously culturally as well. There are things on television that should not be on television. I mean, it should be a felony to glorify gang violence. It should be a felony to glorify prostitution. Fucking obviously. It's obvious that that's the case. And America used to have all this stuff. It used to have codes for comic books. It used to have codes for Hollywood up until 50s and the 60s. And that's when everything went wrong, when those codes went away.
I mean, to some degree, obviously there does need to be limits on these things where we say no, that's actually unacceptable. You can't do that. I think the problem is that, and in many ways, maybe it's good to have those because then it clearly defines the counterculture as the rebellion where it's okay, well, you don't want us to, it's kind of like fetish sort of gear and stuff and bondage gear, what's it called, kink at Pride, where it's kind of this idea, it's actually if you're going to say that I can't be sexual in private, I'm going to bring my sexuality so overtly in public that I'm going to deliberately defy rules of conduct. To some degree, I think that's actually it was really a good thing and a positive thing that probably led a lot to change because it really forces, it's a point of rebellion, it's a point of resistance. And maybe that would only be possible if there was these laws in the first place, I guess. That sort of all these rules and regulations. So it doesn't necessarily stop people making counterculture. But I do think that there has to be some sort of limits. But I think we still have those limits, right? Like, it's not like we don't. Like, that there's not the same limits as they used to be. Like, I think we can all agree that like certain things are not allowed on television. I think that the problem is now, and I think that the irony of Milo's position is actually what I'm more scared of is the limits that would be implemented if it could be made legally binding. Like, could you imagine in terms of like woke politics, we were the rule producers really, like, more than anything. If you look, the neurotics of our society are more likely to be like woke. The rule followers, the sort of promoting certain like limitations to human action. It's going to be like sort of wokeism and that kind of bullshit civil religion. I think that like you get some pretty awful shit, and I don't want to see that awful shit being mandated, or I don't want to see like like these sorts of rules for media being like where it's like you can't make certain jokes, you can't when it goes beyond reason. So like I think it's really funny that you see the conservative saying this when normally it's the conservative that's like don't do this to my freedoms,
So it's precisely that tension, that creative tension between the box.
I have loved hearing aspects
What the fuck just happened, man? Like, why did that happen?
of both folks tonight, genuinely. I first got a glimpse of Stephen on Timcast a couple weeks ago, the day I got tickets for this. So I was like, wow. And I actually enjoyed hearing what you had to say then there as well, too. Christian here, and I wanted to ask this, if you break it down to the bare bones, religion is order. Would you guys agree with that? Like it builds a semblance of a structure of order.
I don't know if I would agree with that. I mean, like, it kind of like, I mean, like, because that just turns religion into like all ethics is religion, maybe. I wouldn't say like, I think if you're talking about ordering people's lives, I think it's like ordering an individual's like being towards a certain teleological goal, a certain spiritual end. Maybe I would say religion was that, but not just order, sort of blanket like order.
Yeah, I mean,
And that's a very Judeo sort of foundation, isn't it? Like Judaism, literally, literally meaning the laws, or like laws, isn't it? Doesn't it? So it's like that's a very like maybe Christian, like Jewish interpretation of what religion is.
Provides a framework, builds a box, builds a wall, however you want to put it. Yeah, we can't think clearly or properly unless we can build walls, meaning unless we can distinguish some things from other things. And,
Yeah, I would say the way that I view it is like religion easily gives us a framework for ethics. It gives us a metaphysical understanding of the world, like where do things come from, and then it gives us like an epistemic understanding of the world. How do I know what's true or what's not true? I think religion like very easily packages those three things up. It gives it to us. We don't have to think about it, and then we focus on things like how do I make my wife happy, or how do I take care of my children without having to do all the work with the other stuff too.
How are you getting on with keeping your wife happy?
Better than you are with your ex-husband.
I don't know. He just got a Ferrari. He seems all right.
What the fuck, man? Why does he keep bringing up his wife? Why? It's gotta be like this, man. Like, why is he getting these like low blows in? Like, it just like, does he want to be cancelled again?
The point I'm getting at is, if you look at Council of Nicaea, 350 AD, to now, same pages in the book, same laws, same directives that we've been given as Christians. But if you look more, and to a point that I love that you brought up this tonight, was that Christianity, organized religion, has gone down in the last 20 years, 30%, and you see this rise of leftism, and you see this rise of
leftism. Is that really what's happened? I mean, the left existed then as well. I think what you're talking about is the discontentment, a rise in discontentment in the United States, and why map that onto the rise of leftism when both could probably be easily mapped on to rise of inequality or like rising inequality?
People talking, or at least having a malleable framework that they just keep changing, and how dangerous that can be. Because, I mean, Hillary Clinton, totally against gay marriage, come to presidential election, oh, this is wrong that this was ever prevented from ever happening. She's pushing DOMA the entire time up until this point. So don't you think it's a little dangerous for left-wing protagonists to have this ever-changing doctrine, whereas other religions have had thousands and thousands of years to just follow the same mindset, the same order?
Like, the thing is that the ridiculousness of that, like, you know, it's an ever-changing doctrine. Like, come on, man. Like, look, religions change too. Mind changes quickly in terms of the way in which people are changing in the United States today, but I don't think that's about leftism, quote unquote. I think what we're seeing is that, like, you know, and actually, if you look at it, there's a lot of Marxists who've been around for a long time now. What's changing, why people are changing so quickly in the United States isn't the left. It's capitalism. It's market capitalism. People are buying their identities, and markets, like, are being procured and proliferated at a faster and faster rate, right? Like, because with the advancements in technology, with the, like, you see markets rise and fall much faster. So, like, that's the crack, really. It's not like the sort of doctrine of the left, because there is no unified doctrine of the left anyway. Like, what we're seeing is people perhaps looking for various laws and codes of institution, and they're not turning to religion. And what we're seeing is the sort of desire for religion, which is leading to wokeism, you know, and civil religion. Yeah, I'll be willing to say that that's dangerous, and I do think that that is a genuine worrying thing. Like, it is. Like, wokeism genuinely scares me. I think it's genuinely terrifying. And I think Carefree Wondering did a really good, like, really broke that down. I think he really went into it and, like, showed that there's a problem there in terms of civil religion. But I think that the overall, just looking towards, like, what if we just continued on the same way? One, we'll continue to have the same problems, and two, the, like, inaction can be as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than action. What we need to think of as Christians really isn't about enforcing some sort of doctrinal code which, you know, has been established for 1,000 years. What we need to be thinking of is, how do we make people live lives which they can find, or help people live lives in which they can find meaning and substance in their lives, so they don't turn away from the religion in the first place. Maybe, like, don't push the gays away would be a good place to start. Maybe don't, you know, essentially, you know, fall into sort of self-righteousness or persecutory attitudes, things like that. Like, that would probably be a good place to start. Maybe look at the teachings of Christ and think about how maybe they more accurately could be applied to, like, you know, a technologically more sophisticated world with moral dilemmas that are, you know, that would be benefited from those teachings, but are not currently being benefited from those teachings because we're living in relation to a code that was designed for a radically different state. Like, that's the way in which I think that Christians should be looking at it today.
I think that, so while the texts themselves haven't changed, I feel like religious practices have kind of adapted to the modern era. I'll speak very narrowly about my religious experience, and then more broadly. Very narrowly, I was a Catholic, and I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. In our archdiocese there, we had multiple Catholic churches, and just the divergence in thought around, for instance, gay people was wildly different from one church to another. In one church, we had very traditional preachers, almost resembled my girlfriend's Baptist church, like very, very, very hardcore people, very traditional, no children, no noises. There was like a glass room. They didn't really even want you to bring your kids there. And then in the other one, it was a way more friendly, more geared towards young people. I think we had, I don't know if every...
To be fair, I think the glass room for kids is actually a good thing in church. I actually do. Because my God, I should be saying, there's the kids in my local church. Like, there's one of them. It's like, to be fair, right? I don't hate the kid or anything. The kid's not done anything wrong. But, like, the mom just lets the kid, like, he was literally running around the church. Like, running up to the altar, like, standing in front of everyone, making noise, stuff like that. And it's like, come on, man. I'm actually here for mass. and I can't hear the mass because your kid's yelling, and you're not doing anything about it. You're not taking them out the room. You're just letting them run around. I think that's just poor parenting, right? I get, like, to be entirely honest with you, I think that's just poor parenting. You're ruining, like, even if you wanted to see mass, I'm sorry, but like that's just like you're ruining it for everyone else, right? But like, you know, like the glass rooms I thought were pretty good, because then, like, as well, like I never really went to them as a kid, because like as an autistic kid, one, I didn't do well like really intermingling with other kids, and I actually wanted to be in the mass. Like I was like really religious as a kid, and I actually really enjoyed church. Not the singing, funnily enough. Didn't enjoy the singing, but enjoyed the like actual stories and the gospel and stuff like that, right? And I thought it was important. Like, it was really quite like a like autistic rule following kind of kid, like the sort of thing with it. And the thing is, I went into the glass room once, and they were teaching Christianity in a very basic way, which I thought was really, really annoying, because I was about, I think I was like 9 or something by the first time I went in there. And obviously there's kids that are like 4 there, you know, like 4 and 3, like, or 4 and 5 and stuff. But I think it's good, like, you know, you've got a little place for kids to go. And it just like, it stops mass being really noisy and stuff, whilst also teaching kids about religion on a Sunday. So that's like it's a good thing. So yeah, I think that's a good thing. But the idea of not letting kids go to mass, though, is messed up. That's just...
Christian church had like the 26-year-old guy that was like leading like the band for doing the music, and they had like drums and guitars and stuff.
Oh, we've got a guitarist at one of our churches. Like, it's like, and one of the local churches, it's like, guitars, right? Like, I'm not saying I actually appreciate them doing it, because like obviously you need music and stuff, but man, I think I need to learn the organ or something, right? Just because I hate the sound of that guitar. Like, it's hard to understand how I'm even supposed to sing, right? Because it's like they're playing the song, they're not playing it particularly well. It doesn't indicate like the rhythm very well. Like, I don't know if it's just because he's not a good guitar teacher or whatever, but like a guitarist or whatever. But like, and then there's no harm against the guy, because I actually really appreciate the fact that they're really trying. But like sometimes, like when they're playing the music and then the priest sings on top of it, and that's like the sort of dominant rhythm that you kind of get into, especially when it's something that you don't know. You're like, I don't know how I'm supposed to sing this. At least for me, I'm not exactly musically gifted or anything, but I really feel like I should just learn the organ or something like that, so I can just fix this. Because there's a huge pipe organ that no one's playing, and the pipe organ's actually really based. And I want the pipe organ back.
And that was it was like a night and day difference in those churches. That was just in my city. I can't imagine like worldwide how different it is. And then I look at people like Muslims, and you know, we can talk about like Islamic extremism. If we look at the I'll hit on the gay thing again. In the United States,
I think that it's ridiculous for you to say that like you've done being friendly with overtly religious people or right wing people, like evolved people. Like, no, I think that there's good right wing and religious people that are often better than left wing people who can be dickheads as well. Like, that's just like very binary thinking. I think that kind of binary thinking is the problem. I think the self-righteousness and the pride that's leading to the degradation of our state, because people aren't having like decent conversations with each other and instead proliferating hegemonic group-centered thinking without actually analyzing the thinking within that group.
Muslims as a whole are more favorable towards homosexuality than the average American population, which is wild, right? Compared to other countries where there are some Islamic populations that still, you know, kill gay people, assuming you have enough witnesses or however it works in some of those countries today. Or at the very least, they try to make it illegal. So all of this is to say that, like, while I think that sometimes Christians or Muslims or any of the Abraham or any religion, they'll kind of lean on their text and they'll say, well, this is unchanging, and we've got the same text throughout all of time. I feel like the job of the community leaders, the preachers that do the sermons,
the living tradition, but obviously it depends upon the doctrine of the living tradition as well. So a lot of them, like if you're a fundamentalist church, you're taking things literally, then you're going to find a lot less growth and development, and any sort of reinterpretation or continued translation and interpretation of the text.
That talk to the community are constantly trying to, I don't want to say reinterpret, because that's not really right, but they're constantly trying to like adapt and readapt the teachings to make them fit in your modern day life. You know, like what would Jesus say to a kid that's paying, you know, more attention to his iPhone than his mom or dad telling him how to do chores? You know, you're not going to find, Steve Jobs in the Bible, but you can still get teachings out of that. So it's difficult, but I think that religion still changes and adapts, you know, like, anything else does, even if the text itself doesn't change.
I completely agree with that. That was very Catholic of you, Destiny. That was very Catholic of Stephen. He looks towards the living tradition. There'll be Protestants going wild. What is it? It's is it so? I can't say it. Is it sola scriptura? It's like the Latin.
Was that okay? Or?
Well, yeah. The point I was making was, no, thank you. The point I was making was how the left keeps moving goalposts.
Mm-hmm.
They are, I mean, progressive, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're moving goalposts. Tomorrow they may be completely against transgender. Anything revolving transgender. They could be if
Is that how? I don't think.
Sure.
I don't think.
And you see
that's
that
how
time
it's-
and time again.
I think that's
Whereas,
such stupidity, right? Like as if the right and left aren't moving goalposts in relation to each other just to try and overcome each other. Like it's just an attempt to subvert the other party. That's the American politics, and not even just American politics, but like the two-party state has become like a hegemonic war zone between like partisan groups. In the United States, it's sort of abstract and arbitrary. In most countries, it's labor organizations versus conservative or business orientated organizations. Like Vosh, yeah, I can see what you're saying.
conservatism, by definition, is kind of holding back towards days of yore, I guess.
Maybe. I feel like both sides have changed a lot. So, like, for instance, if we, like, I think neocon is like a slur to conservatives, right? If you were to compare, like, the Bush-era conservatives, those guys, to, like, the MAGA people today, these guys will hate each other, right? Because Bush-era conservatives are, like, pro-corporation, pro-Iraq, pro-Afghanistan, roughly, generally speaking, and the Trump guys are, like, I hate big companies, no foreign wars whatsoever, screw all of that stuff. So I feel like conservatives have changed a bit, too. I agree that, like, obviously progressives are pushing the envelope quite a bit, and conservatives are kind of, saying like, well, hold on. But like their movement is growing and evolving as well, I would say.
Well, the relative change is night and day, though. I mean, you can't compare the two. And I have to, I have never in my life gone into a Latin Mass church where people are boxed off. I think you just made that up. If you didn't, please tell us what church it is, because that.
Fuck, like he's never had the glass room. He's never seen a church with a glass room. Like, what's he talking about, man? Like the little kids go to the glass bit at the back. Like, it's not every church, and yeah, it mightn't be every church, but they're all little, like, it's a little place for kids. It's the kids group. I don't, like, it's a common thing. Like, yeah, like, it's like, he's just made it up, guys. He's just lying about Catholics.
That's...
Milo wasn't raised Catholic, was he? This is the thing.
Not Catholic teaching.
Sure. One of the pairs I went to was St. Leo, the 10th, in Omaha, Nebraska. They have like a whole little glass enclosure. You can go into the church and you can see where the children are. I've been in plenty of Catholic churches that do exactly this for screaming children. Sounds like you haven't been in a church before, Milo. But go ahead.
I have been to. Well, you leveled the charge against traditionalist Catholics, and I've been to Latin masses with the FSSP and ICK and even SSPX all over the country for years. I must just have missed the churches you're going to, which is weird. As far as Muslims being more pro-gay, well, there's two things to say about that. One, I guess that disproves the case that immigrants are going to bring conservative values with them, so we should definitely close the borders. Because if the Muslims are coming in pro-gay and the Hispanics are coming in equally wobbly, there's no conservative social case for abortion. Close the borders, done. So that's helpful to know. But also...
Did he just do like a little hat tip towards eugenics whilst saying, yeah, that's wrong, so we should be anti-immigration? Did that actually just happen? Like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy, man? Like, this is look, trauma can't excuse this, man. I get you fucked up, right? I get you fucked up, but sort yourself out, right? No Christian talks like this. This is wrong.
There's no contiguous landmass with any Muslim country here. Muslims who come to America are by definition wealthy, international, globalized, and seeking Western values and seeking to live in America. It's hardly surprising that the people who leave the Muslim world to come to America might be more in favor of progressive values, because that's precisely what they're leaving.
Hello, it's nice to see both of you. I'm also from Omaha, Nebraska, and I can tell you at least 3 other names of churches: St. Wenceslaus, St. Robert's, and St. Cecilia's, and one of them is confessional. They all do the same thing, where they put the children in the back.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
the state I know well. So if that happens,
Like, yeah, man. Like, it's not even just stately. Like, if they're doing it in the UK, like, come on, man. Like,
in that particular state, that's pretty gross.
I also lived overseas in Germany. They also had that as well, in very traditional cathedrals.
it's like a common thing. I don't know about cathedrals. I don't know how many cathedrals. I've never really been in a cathedral where it happens. But it's usually like the more, I think the way I've seen it's the more modern churches is built with that in mind. Precisely for the fact that kids ruin mass.
My question is for you, Mr. Yiannopoulos.
They just get bored, man. They just get bored and they start hitting things off, and they like look at their moms, and they're like it's just constant like that. They're just bored as hell, right? They don't even know what's going on.
It has to do with why should we assume that a Christian nation returning to its Christian values, if we buy into the premise that this is a Christian nation, and it is a Christian nation because, as I understand it, because the founders were Christian, and therefore somehow that also influenced the text of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence, and that is...
I mean, yes, that is exactly what happened, though, right? Like, the people who wrote the Bill of Rights, the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence, like, they really did assume Christian values. Like, they really did. Like, it's actually written in there. It's not like he's actually making that up. It's like, we are one nation under God, or like, you know, we take these rights to be self-evident. That like these, like, what is it in the Declaration of Independence? It's like, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these life rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right? So that is written into the Declaration of Independence, right? Like, it's not like he's making that part up. Like, that is genuinely assumed in the American Constitution. Well, assumed when I say the American Constitution, I don't mean the written Constitution. I mean the Constitution of the United States, as in the basis from which the written Constitution is actually reflective. That's why I'm maybe as a Brit, I'm not like I don't know how I feel about this written Constitution stuff, but like the basis of the Constitution is the people, and it was reflective in the establishment of the state.
What therefore makes this a Christian nation. My question to you is this return then, why should we assume that would be friendly to all denominations, including Roman Catholics? And so my family is Roman Catholic, and I'm sure that you can appreciate this as someone who is deeply Catholic. Roman Catholics do not have a great history in this country.
No. Oh, no, they don't. No, not at all. I talk to Americans, they fucking hate Catholics. A lot of them still hate Catholics.
Oh, it's quite an anti-Catholic culture in this country.
The Know Nothing Party of the 1850s, the first Roman Catholic president was John F. Kennedy.
KKK went after Catholics just like they did blacks.
And this was all done in the name of Christian nationalism. And
it was not done in the name of Christian nationalism, because that term did not exist.
Well, it was attached to the same ideology at the time.
Was it? Because you sort of did this sort of vague sketching of how somebody might come to a conclusion that since the founders were sort of Christian.
To be fair, like, I will say, like, it is worth mentioning that when American Christians argue against us, a lot of them say I'm not Christian because I'm a Catholic. So when we talk about Christian nationalism, there is the risk that you will just be deemed as non-Christian, just as like Irish people were deemed non-white, even though Irish people are very clearly white. It happens.
And then we should be sort of Christian too. But I gave you a much more precise and crisp and specific explanation than that, didn't I? What I said was that these documents were constructed outsourcing morality to Christianity, disestablishing the church. And that Adams said that they were constructed for immoral and religious people And at that time, he meant Christian. I also mentioned, and I did find the judge's name. It wasn't Ren Christos. I misspoke. It was William O. Douglas, who is one of the most famously left-wing Supreme Court justices of all time. And his quote was, "We are a religious people whose institutions presuppose a supreme being. The highest court of this land has confirmed repeatedly that America has a Christian foundation." So I think it's a bit unfair of you to sort of suggest that I was like gesturing vaguely at the founders.
Like, in God we trust. But yeah, I mean, like, to be fair, I think it genuinely does. Like, it does actually have a very Christian foundation. It relies upon like a very Christian outlook. Yeah.
And they're saying, well, since they're sort of Christian, then we've got a sort of Christian inheritance.
And if he had have held up this argumentation, like, I think he's starting to like sober up a little bit now. But like, if you had have held this line of argumentation from the start and actually managed to make some cogent points rather than just insult Destiny's wife and Destiny, then yeah, he might have actually had a decent debate. Yeah, but like, this has been trash because of it.
I made a very specific and crisp explanation about the founding of this country.
I said that before as well. There's nothing about this that necessitates nationalism. Like, quite the opposite. And you're right. Like, they did intend for a separation of church and state as well. So if anything, the founders, I think the whole point, I think Christianity in general is actually very much against forcing or coercing people to become Christian. From its like from the very foundations of Christianity, we see that. So yeah.
Country. So let's just be clear on that before we proceed. Next up, I share your.
Can I ask a question on that? Why we keep saying this? It was so clearly a Christian nation. Why is it so curiously absent from all of our founding documents?
Well, it was done on purpose, and it's not. I mean, it's not absent from Lincoln. It's not absent
from our Constitution, the thing that enshrines what the government is and does. And
you know perfectly well it's absent from those on purpose because the state, there is a separation of a technical, legal, and institutional separation of church and state in this country. But that does not mean that the founders were indifferent to whether or not people would be Christian. And indeed, they said the opposite. They said that they were making a country for a moral and religious people, by which they meant Christian. So the words of those documents were written very carefully and mostly to avoid Protestant infighting because of the different regions in America that were establishing themselves at the time. That's most of the reason. And those documents that do omit God for a very particular and specific.
He actually had a box of wine, did he? I could believe that, man, because he just wasn't with it. Like, he just wasn't there.
Big reason. But God is woven into the culture of the country, whether it is, the Pledge of Allegiance or whatever else. And you can see it. You can see that
Pledge of Allegiance was written by a socialist, right?
Tenor and texture and culture everywhere. In some specific documents, it
was a way to sell flags.
Absent for the reasons that I've said. But you know perfectly well, and as I've tried to explain briefly this evening, this country was created on the understanding that. And that's the bit that's crumbling now, right? It's the on the understanding bit that's crumbling. And without that, the founders themselves said that the center cannot hold, and it isn't holding. And so that's the answer to you. And then I want to finish, I think the lady had a question for me, which I don't remember because I got interrupted. What was the second half of it?
I apologize.
It wasn't you, it was him.
Well, my question was, why should we assume that this new movement of Christian nationalism would be inclusive of all denominations? You mentioned, for instance, Pentecostal, Methodists, not a true Christian because they're not listening to the Gospels. Which Gospels, which interpretation of the Gospels? Different churches have
Absolutely.
different beliefs.
We can't necessarily, and we shouldn't, and there's a long history of, different strands of Christianity battling it out. But there's also, I think, much more importantly, and more obviously and more persuasively, a tradition of countries that have an established state religion and what that does to the culture and how it impedes.
Yeah, but it's pretty much unipolar. Like, it's not like the established state religion is like multiple denominations coexisting under one roof, unless he's trying to say that, what they'll do is they'll make a new Church of America. Oh God, I hope that make a Church of America.
Change for change's sake, and it seems to be a sacrifice worth making. But yeah, sure, I share your anxiety about Catholicism. America has imported Catholics now and again when it suited the country for the labor force. Whether it's getting some Irish guys in, getting some Italians in. I mean, Catholics aren't ever entirely and completely at home on this soil. Yeah, I share that. That's fair.
I think it's a fair question. I think you should push for harder answers. When people talk about wanting to exclude certain denominations or exclude certain religions from the country, I think you should push them on a solid answer for who particularly do you want to include or who particularly do you want to exclude. Not to draw the parallels, although the parallels write themselves. I think you can do similarly to people that are like white nationalists, right? When you've got people like Fuentes, who obviously has some Hispanic in him, right? Well, where do we draw the line at who's white enough for the country and who's not? And who's to say that once we've drawn one line, we're not going to look amongst ourselves and decide, well, we're going to draw this line even further. And I think it's a good question in regards to the Christian nationalist stuff too. I did a bit of reading for preparation for the debate, and it's actually insane how like undecided it is what Christian nationalism even means. Does that extend to people's ethnic backgrounds? Is Christianity going to become an ethnicity like Jewishness is just seen as an ethnicity? Are people wanting to include all Christians but give some more rights than others? Do people want to enshrine like Christian doctrine in law, like Sharia law?
Oh no, like when you go back to like monks being boiled in oil, slightly less than grey. You were like people like whether it's Henry VIII starts torturing everyone, like his daughter, like was it like Mary starts torturing everyone. Like, I was torturing so that he tortures the Catholics, she tortures the Protestants. Then Elizabeth comes around, tortures the Catholics again. I
have honestly no idea, and I don't feel like after listening to Milo ramble for an hour and a half, I have any more of an idea of what it is.
In many ways, like that's the whole thing. Like whether, like if you look at Protestants like Francis Bacon, he's like, oh, the separation between philosophy and theology, or like science and theology. Is necessitated because like really what he's looking towards is not being fucking murdered for doing philosophy.
Then when I came in here at the beginning of the night.
No, I don't think anybody knows, but that's because nobody used this expression more than 2 years ago. That's sort of what we're here to thrash out and talk about. And there's no person, unlike some movements. I mean, America First is kind of Trump basically owns that and gets to decide what that means. Nobody has sort of stepped up and to the mantle of I'm the Christian nationalism guy. There isn't one. So Andrew Torber from Gab wrote a book and Nick Fuentes talked about it briefly, and various other people have used it. Marjorie's used it and all the rest of it, but there isn't kind of
10
a
minutes
Christian
left, boys.
nationalism
We can
guy.
do it.
So I don't think
And
it's
girls and
concretely
gays.
defined. But I'm not here to defend a nebulous political philosophy. I'm here to suggest that America might do better if, in the commonly understood sort of bucket of Christianity, and people make jokes and they say, "Oh, there are millions of Protestant denominations." When you actually look at it, like 99% of people fall into
Not
one
with
of these
Milo,
big buckets.
by the way. I'm just saying I agree with you saying I wish some of the people who returned to the past actually studied it a little bit. I wasn't agreeing with Milo there, just before that gets clipped. Please don't do that, Newis.
I think it's reasonable to say, well, if you're in one of those buckets, you're a Christian. That's fine for now. It would be better if this country returned to an understanding of that moral underpinning that was a little bit closer to the people who came up with it in the first place. And that's all I'm here to do.
I will push you one more time, Mr. Yiannopoulos, and I'll make it more specific. So specifically the question of abortion. That's a great example of how different denominations disagree very fiercely on that question. Do you know how would, for instance, a return to a move to Christian nationalism resolve that?
I don't think there's any plausible Christian future for this country in which any sort of abortion is permitted. Under any circumstances. And this is one of the countries in the world that's got a very creditable record when it comes to ferocious pro-life advocacy. And it will be reassuring to you as a Catholic I think probably to hear that I don't really see any way of this proceeding except under uncompromising pro-life banner. But these are all open questions. I'm not pretending to be an encyclopedia on Christian nationalism because there isn't one. It's something that somebody just invented. But I definitely will stand here and defend Christ as the essential moral underpinning of our civilization.
You can do that without being a nationalist, right? I'll 100% stand Christ as the perfect moral idol, right? Like I'm a Catholic. I think that's what a Catholic would do. I think that's what Christians in general would do. We'll look towards like the perfect idol as Christ. Like he is the goal. he's what we're really aimed towards. Don't really need the nationalism for any of that, though, right? Like, I don't need to be like, we need to be nationalists. You know, we need to essentially just coerce and force and manipulate people into essentially agreeing. And he didn't actually even give a good response to the question, which is like, well, what about like how we're gonna, you know, basically draw the line on this point? Like, are you Christian if you want this? Are you Christian if you want that? How is it going to work?
And there are people who worship him in various ways. And there are people who...
Why did he say him like that when, like just because it's like a big thing about pronouns? It will be, won't it?
Have fallen into various different kinds of Christian denomination, but, you know, I think brothers in Christ is a reasonably well understood expression, and I think a fair one, and that's good enough for me for now.
Well, before I will say one more thing, and then I promise I will hand the microphone back to you. Part of the reason why I'm asking is because my family history as a Catholic is as an Irish Catholic. My grandparents were involved with the Irish Republican Army at the time. Mm-hmm. The
people are like,
differences between Catholicism and Protestantism in Ireland during that time.
Yeah, can we please not go back to that? Like, people are like trying to kick off shit with Northern Ireland. Can we just be friends? I don't really give a fuck. Like, look, I don't really care. Like, the people of Northern Ireland can decide which way they want to live and shit like that. I really, can we not do that? Like, none of this blow each other up over like fucking absolute nonsense. This fucking IRA or Ulster Defense Regiment, absolute fucking bullshit. Like, I hate you both. Please stop killing each other. Like I get the IRA, like, up to like, you know, the point in which Ireland really got to a, you know, like a stable nation under its own rule, and then past that point, like you just kind of a dick, yeah, you know, and like, you know, it's the same thing with it's the same, and the British, I mean, are even worse in the history, like far worse, and the Ulster Defense Regiment and the Tories and all that involvement with it, like absolute dickheads. Can we please not? I don't want any of that. I just don't get it. Like, why the fuck do you want blood? Like, just, I mean, come on, like, Northern Ireland's not that bad, right? Sure, I mean, like, I mean, it doesn't look too nice, but, like, it doesn't look that bad.
Resulted in cars being blown up. It was not a
But you also know
place.
that there are a lot of other factors involved in there to do with borders, the English. I mean, there's a lot that went into that, right? It wasn't as simple as this is a religious conflict between North and South. It was, it was...
But like, that's what's sparking the problems now, is like there's more Catholics now in Northern Ireland than there ever was, because Catholics reproduce faster. How are the lads? You know? But it's actually causing tensions. And I don't want any of that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't get it. Like, you know, I don't really fucking get it. Like, I like United Ireland, or like, you know, Northern Ireland being British. Like, if the people of Northern Ireland want to be British, great. If people of Northern Ireland want to be Irish, great. I really don't care. I just don't get it. Like, just freedom of self-determination.
It's most accurate to say that it was a kind of small civil war with heavy religious overtones, or tempered, flavored, informed by religion. But this was not straight religious conflicts. It's just not true to say that. You know that.
I do not know that. It was such a deep conflict that my grandfather couldn't take a civil service exam in like the early 1900s. And I will leave you with that. I apologize for eating so much time.
No, you've been the most thoughtful questioner so far. You have no apology to make.
My question's for Milo. From Christian to Christian, I just want to let you know that there are a few things that I disagree with you tonight. Probably the biggest question I have I'm a bit puzzled.
Religion wasn't the core issue. I think the core issue was the fact that England invaded Ireland. What was it, like back in the 1500s? That was probably the core issue. It was the English conquest of Ireland, and then and its domination and exploitation of the Irish. And that largely became religiously fueled because, well, the English were Protestant and the Irish were Catholic, and so it became like Protestant versus Catholic as part of that. Yeah, British imperialism. Yeah, David. Yeah. Yeah, it really was. Yeah, well, I mean, it wasn't just like an arbitrary divide. It was like that Protestants and Catholics actually had, like, obviously if you're a Protestant, you're probably going to want to be with the Protestants, and if you're a Catholic, you're probably going to want a Catholic state, and vice versa. So like they typically paid off as well. I mean, really, what they should have done is try to mediate like each other's interests a little bit better. And you know, like shared, you know, this is the thing with Northern Ireland. I don't really care who's in charge, like if as long as the people in Northern Ireland are in charge. And if, let's say, they want a joint governance between Britain and Ireland, fair enough. If they want Ireland to be governed, fair enough. If they want Britain to be governed, fair enough. Like the point is that the people should just decide what they want, and then let that be that. That's the way it should be. We should be democratic about it. The problem is that we weren't democratic about it, and it was imperialism. That's the main issue. It was authoritarianism.
That Christian nationalism itself, it seems like an oxymoron to me. And
yes,
from theologian to theologian, I wanted to, because I assume that as a Christian, your beliefs stem from your theology. I wanted to ask you a theological question.
I will do my best. I've never described myself as a theologian, but I'll do my best.
All right. I wanted to ask you, how would you respond to the themes of Jesus resisting any type of political or physical authority here on earth? For instance, in John 18, when Pilate was questioning Jesus about his own nation handing him over to be crucified.
My nation is not of this world. My kingdom is not of this world.
Jesus said that his kingdom was not of this world. Also, another example would just be Jesus healing the Roman soldier who decided to hit him, right? So how do you know that you aren't wanting Jesus to become the political Messiah that the Jews expected them to free them from Rome?
Yeah, they were looking for a warrior.
The very same.
And they got a peacemaker.
Jesus, they refused to take on that role.
Well, I'm a Catholic, so I'm quite comfortable with earthly spiritual authority. And Jesus didn't leave us a Bible, he left us a church in the form of the apostles, whose descendants that we call...
Yeah, but that's the apostolic church. You don't see that, and it's not the government. What the fuck? Like, if you look at, like, I'm sorry for swearing again. If you look at, like, the teachings of Thomas Aquinas, for example, right? Like, very famous Catholic philosopher, dominant Catholic philosopher. You have the spiritual community, or you have the what is it, what is it called? Oh no, don't tell us. Wait a minute, I've forgotten the names of them. There's it's like the universal community. Oh no, what are they called? He uses an Aristotelian term. But it's essentially like the community of, oh no. Wait a minute. I can't remember what he called it again. Oh no. I'll have to go back and read Thomas Aquinas now. This is embarrassing. It's what is it? It's like the community of something, or like it's like basically around universality, and I can't remember like what it's specifically called, but basically the concept is the separation between like your kingdom, or like the community, the state, and the church, and it was like the universal community that you have. It's like you're a member of, like in Aristotle you're a member of one, in Thomas Aquinas you're a member of two, and one doesn't preclude membership to the other. So like you can be a member of the church, and you can also be a member of whatever community that is being governed separately. And he looks towards like the governance of that to represent kind of like the freedom of how God would govern the state. So govern the worlds, in the sense that it's a sort of representation of Christ's divine power, right? Like, or an imitation rather, where it's like you rule it in relation to the way in which you believe to be right. I mean, within the teachings of the church, I guess. But like, it's not sort of laid out that way. It's more of like you can be the church is the church and the state are very separate.
Now bishops. have continued his teaching to the present day, and that institution has become very wealthy, very complicated, very difficult to generalize about, and very controversial, I suppose, if from one particular point of view. Christ left us an institution. He birthed one when he said, "On this rock I build my church."
Right, okay, but that's the Holy Apostolic Church, and we have that, not the American government.
He left us an institution. The fact that he destroyed a lot of bad ones.
This is like gonna piss the Americans off no end. Like this is how I would convince the Americans to not be Christian nationalists. Tell them to be Catholics.
When he was here, only really serves to underscore the point.
So it's just a difference in authority.
Can you,
well, there's a valid, legitimate authority, which is authority stemming from Christ, which is the descendants of the apostles, the See of St. Peter.
Wait, can you reread the last part of that question? Sorry.
Sure. I said, how do you know that you aren't wanting Jesus to become the same political Messiah that the Jews expected to free them from Rome?
Okay, I'm taking a stab at it. It's been a long time, but isn't this what the render unto Caesar quote meant? That there are going to be things that exist in the domain of government where you have obligations and responsibility to the state, but those things
render unto Caesar what is his
exist separate to the obligations you have to your church and your family, so you can still live your best life being a Christian without expecting that to also fulfill like the political goals of your nation, no?
Correct, which is why we don't...
Like that.
And that's why like St. Augustine was like, he thought the government was essentially just a band of thugs and a gang and had nothing to do with salvation.
Why we don't necessarily need Trump to be...
But he wasn't Catholic. That's what you got to understand, is that the real Catholic here is Milo. Glass rooms do not exist in the back of churches, and children are never segregated away from the Catholic from Catholic Mass. And Saint Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and any Catholic that usually argues for a separation between, I don't know, church authority and the individual authority of given states, well, they aren't real Catholics.
The most morally perfect person in order for him to be a good president. Exactly.
Yeah, I think Jesus' main point.
Yeah, imagine that the American government has the keys to the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Oh my God, the American government would bomb the gates of heaven if given the opportunity.
Point was just that he wasn't aiming for political power, and neither should his followers. That was pretty much what I got out of that.
Yes, that's fair, but that's a different question. But that's fair.
Thank you, everybody, for the great questions. Now we're going to do closings real quick, and then we're going to have to head out of here. Milo, you have 5 minutes, then Steven, you have 5 minutes.
Color Catcher Max Protect.
Color Catcher Max Protect. How long will that closing statements actually be? Because there's 6 minutes left, so they're taking 3 minutes each. I bet it's Milo 5, Destiny 1.
Seem to have got away with saying that I wasn't.
This was an actual episode of South Park. You're right. This is a South Park like parody,
especially pro Second Amendment in Tennessee. So I'm just going to take the win on that one, and simply tell you that I moved here with all of the usual assumptions about America, and having been here, it's sort of a difficult thing to hear, really, but America is one of those countries that you sort of what's that old quote? America always does the right thing once it's tried everything else first. And America seems to kind of regularly need these outside observers to tell it about itself, whether it's de Tocqueville or whatever. It's not very good at self-reflection. So all I can do is offer you what I've seen, and that is that the gap between the way America describes itself and the reality here is so enormous and so gigantic and so suicidally large, actually. The way that since the 1950s and 60s, this country has diverged from its founding objectives, from its founding morality, is terrifying. And the rest of the world needs you guys to be in good shape, to be in good fighting shape, and to get it together. Because we don't have many other options. China, Russia, oblivion, right? I do still think that the world's in good shape when America's in good shape. But it hasn't been for nearly 100 years now. You haven't won a war in 75 years, do you know that? 75 years America hasn't won a war. Things are going very, very badly wrong here, and we need you. But we need you to be strong, we need you to be healthy, we need you to be wholesome, and we need you to be moral. We need that from you, even though you're...
I feel like he's almost trying to mimic Donald Trump in like his facial expressions and stuff. Like now I think of it, like that there, I felt the presence of Trump. Do you know what I mean? Like a kind of parody of Trump.
You know, our child in some ways.
I mean, I do in many ways. Like I think, like given the global scenario, like I don't want America fucking itself over. Like I really would appreciate if we could like calm the divisions down and maybe have a little bit more unity right now. That would be really great for all of us that are on in America and don't want to participate in the culture war, really don't give a shit about your culture war, and really are looking for kind of global stability. That would be great. I do think that would be beneficial.
You've grown big and you've grown strong, and you're our protector. But our protector now is writhing on the ground, diseased, shrieking, blinded, and pathetic.
Do I think that Milo's had any good takes, if any what? Yeah, I think that some of them. I think that the fact that the United States was built on a Christian foundation, assumed that Christian foundation, and since the collapse of the church into secularism has fallen into increasing cultural conflicts and divisions around about the basis of its moral responsibilities and the sort of the foundational concepts necessary for a working judicial system, a working democratic system, a working and free media, a working society, really, as a whole. I think that he made some good points there. I think he didn't flesh them out. I don't think he really expanded upon them. I think that there was room there. Like this was an abstract for what could have been a really interesting thesis, bar the Christian nationalism part, just about how America was a Christian country, it needs its Christian values, and has in many ways fallen into a state of degeneracy, which may or may not be able to get out of without the help of without realizing its Christian heritage. Does that mean that it necessarily needs to be Christian? Maybe not, but it might need to be maybe establish ethical communities and maybe look towards like what Alistair McIntyre talks about, bridging the incommensurability between various competing rationalities, which have been historical in origin and are growing more and more diverse from each other. And so the maybe needs to, to kind of look towards like Abraham Lincoln in this, and it's like a house divided against itself will not stand, and perhaps it, they can start to work out their problems, philosophically speaking. That would have been, I think, really interesting. Unfortunately, you didn't really get any of that. What we got was him insulting Destiny's wife, him insulting Destiny, him insulting Destiny's child, and then some sort of semi-paranoid ramblings about Christian nationalism. So yeah.
And we've gone outside in the rest of the world from admiring this country, from moving here because we love the idea of its values so much, to being confronted with the ugly reality that America's greatest export is now sodomy and vaccines and stuff like that. And that's not what it was supposed to be. So I would kind of encourage you to reflect on whether anybody is happier or better off, wealthier, doing better in 2023 than they were in 1953. And to say that clocks can't be turned back is just historically ignorant. It's just completely wrong. But what normally happens is they're turned back very violently. What normally happens is that they're turned back by force, and they're turned back too far, or they're turned into something ugly. And that has happened again and again and again. And the window for America to save itself is closing. It's very narrow.
Sodomy and Vaccines would be a great rock band name, man. Nuclear math rock band, Sodomy and Vaccines.
Maybe a generation. Maybe it's too late. But you owe it to yourselves and to the rest of us to try. And if you want to make America the best it can be, if you want to be a good athlete, you got to train. If you want to be a good writer, you have to read.
Why does the American accent keep coming out there? Like, is he like autistic? Like, is it like an accidental sort of slip into like an American accent, or is it just that?
And right, if you want to be a good American, you got to go to church. Thank you.
I hate you, Sean. This conversation was definitely something different than what I was expecting. Actually, you know what? No, it was exactly what I was expecting. I feel like Milo is kind of the perfect showman for the Christian nationalist movement. A lot of bravado, a lot of theatrics, a lot of 1 HP voicing, but no actual actionable material anywhere, no concrete ideology to stand on, no policy positions to recommend, not even like a clear or even a vague outline of what it is he even stands for. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention because I was watching Subway Surfers on my phone for half this debate. I don't know if anybody else in here feels like they came away with a better understanding of what Christian nationalism is than before they came in. But yeah. Something that I get very frustrated about when I talk about politics, the reason why I do these conversations, the reason why I talk to people who are as far away from me as people like Milo can be, is because I think it's important to cut through a lot of the bullshit that a lot of people preach when they're trying to turn people over to their new political movements. I think that we have very real problems today, and I don't think we ever have a chance to discuss them when we're talking about how much better life would have been in the 1200s or in the 1950s. We're not getting rid of cell phones. We're not putting women back in the kitchen. We're not getting rid of birth control. The internet's not going anywhere. We're not locking down our borders. You know, we live in a world today that is as much different from 1980 as 1980 was from the 1200s that, you know, Milo's so obsessed with. And I think that we need better conversations with people, better policies that we can advocate for, better things that we can talk about to move our people forward, rather than having people endlessly fracture and atomize themselves in these silly little political movements that people can't even adequately define. So if you come away from here tonight, I hope that when you talk to your friends about things related to this, if you want to talk about church, talk about a church you want to go to, talk about actions that you do. The cool things about my church is that every Saturday or every Sunday or whenever you went to Mass, you got to meet a group of people, you got to socialize, you got to have a community. Sometimes you would do community events, and you would just have like basically communities that you would develop around that you would do things with every week, because socializing with each other is really important. I think this is one of the things that we miss the most today, especially when we spend all of our time in front of our phones and our computers. I hope that people continue to find things in their life to build upon. Maybe in future conversations we can, or not we, but me and somebody else can talk about the different things that you can do to build upon that. And I hope you guys don't get lost down these really weird niche micro ideologies that offer you, you know, the universe and talk about absolutely nothing.
Easy destiny win. That's what it is. Easy destiny W. But more importantly, very, very much a Milo L. That was a very big loss for Milo. That was actually a pretty good end speech as well from Destiny. I like his little closing statement. I think that was pretty good. But that was definitely a Destiny win.